There's so many options out there to tighten your skin. Everyone's trying to sell you a cream, or they're trying to sell you a device, or they're trying to sell you a clinical treatment, or they're trying to sell you surgery. Which one is best? How does it work? How much does it cost? What's the invasiveness? What's the risk? How can you compare them? How can you combine them? What's the right way? These are questions which I've had in my career for a very long time now. I've been doing this for over 10 years. I've treated well over 10,000 patients. And this video is a culmination of everything I've got from that experience and trying to put it all into one video. Now, I have taught this all around the world to medical institutions like the Royal College in London, at conferences, at clinics, at hospitals, all sorts of places, and all sorts of healthcare professionals. And I still teach to this day because I'm a consultant in biotech research. And with all that experience, I used to be a dentist as well, believe it or not. But with all that experience, I'm going to try and squeeze everything together and go through as many of the options in one place. And also, I'm going to give you what my experience has taught me in terms of a systematic and consistent and reliable way that will work for the vast, vast majority of people in a very easy to understand way. So as you can see, this is skin tightening advice after over 10,000 patients over 10 plus years. There are pictures that will come up on screen as you go through as well. So let's take a look. This is a rough idea of where we're going to go with this video. So I'm going to talk about stuff that we can do at home, stuff that you need to go to a clinic for, that's non-surgical and surgical. And then as a result of that, what I tend to go for, or what I tend to use and get great results with as a result of all this experience and putting it all together. Now, the thing is, this is not every single treatment or option in the world, because the video would be 5,000 hours long or something like that, but it's the vast majority of the most common and popular stuff that's out there. You will also see different clinicians with different opinions, and that's absolutely fine. Doesn't mean that one person is wrong and another is right. There's reasons why particular people use certain things, and I'm going to go through my reasoning for each thing here if I think something is good or if I think something is bad. I've also got scientific references, so you can go and look things up if you think that, I brought a paper up to reinforce my view on something. You can go and double check that if you wish. And along the bottom there, you can see all the things that we're going to go through for every option as well. So the first thing that we're going to look at is stuff that you can do at home. And within that category of home work that you can do, or home options, there's subcategories as well. And the first one is skincare. Now, the first thing to say is there is no skincare in the world that will give you a facelift. You should never fall for, marketing terms such as facelift in a jar, facelift in a bottle. I don't think that's possible in the strictest sense. You know what a facelift is. It's a surgical technique. You physically pull everything up and you take out excess skin with a scalpel. No cream is going to take out excess skin like a scalpel does. And so with skincare, I think realistically the best you can hope to achieve is some improvement in the quality of the skin. But is it going to absolutely tighten and or lift, perhaps as a bonus? Realistically, in my genuine, honest opinion, no. I think there's skincare options, which I'm going to show you today, which can help with other options when you combine them together at the same time. But I don't think you're going to fully tighten or lift your face with just skincare. Now, there is very good skincare out there, but it's still skincare. It's not a facelift. It's not a laser or anything like that. And so my advice to my patients is don't expect skincare on its own to achieve a great deal unless you're talking about longer term, in which case, you can see significant before and afters in the longer term. But think of skincare as a sort of cheerleader that cheers on the other treatment, which is a little bit more invasive perhaps, and is actually really giving you what you want. And if you did that treatment on its own, it might give you a great result. Combine it with skincare to nourish the skin, you'll probably get a little bit more of an effect or more of a result. That's the perspective I think is appropriate in skincare. By itself, it's not a facelift, but it can improve the outcome of other things by giving good quality nourishment to the cells in the right place. So typically, that's what we say. That's what I say in clinic. But the problem is there's so much marketing out there. And how do you know which ingredient is best? Everyone's got a new peptide or some new plant extract or, something along those lines. And honestly, I don't think there's anything special out there. Even if someone comes up with some fancy new ingredient, I don't think there's really much great evidence for most things out there, especially when something is new. There's never going to be great evidence because there's no long-term study on it. But I think, that the best you can do is an adjunct to other treatment. So typically what people will, and as you can see there, retinoids, if you don't know what that word means, it's a form of vitamin A. It's a derivative of vitamin A. So retinol, which many of you have heard of, is an alcohol form of a retinoid, if you like. It's a type of retinoid. You can also get aldehyde versions or an aldehyde form of vitamin A, which is retinaldehyde. You can also get carboxylic acid versions called retinoic acid. It's just to do with the oxidation and reduction state of the chemicals that are used. If you look at something like a carboxylic acid version, like retinoic acid, it's the same base of vitamin A, but the functional group has changed from, let's say, an oxygen and a hydrogen, a hydroxyl group in retinol, and it's changed to, say, a COOH, carbon double bond oxygen, and then a hydroxyl group on that carbon. That's what makes it retinoic acid. And retinoic acid is the more stronger version out of the three that I've mentioned there. Now, when it comes to retinoids, that gives you a clue as to what is available to you. If you can go and buy something in a shop, it doesn't matter how well it's marketed. It doesn't matter how much effort, some big brand puts into it. The fact that you can buy it in a shop means it's really not that strong. And you may think, well, why do they sell it then? Well, they sell it and put so much marketing into it because that's the strongest they can sell. When you walk into a drugstore, you cannot pick up a prescription item off the shelf. It's prescription only. If it's off the shelf, it's over the counter. And so typically over the counter, you'll get retinol, you'll get retinaldehyde, and you may get some modern derivatives as well, but that's a topic for another day. But typically they're all you can buy. Now, when it comes to the higher level, when it comes to things like retinoic acid, or even along that same tier of retinoic acid, you've got something called adapalene. Brand name is Differin, Differin. These are much stronger versions, much stronger retinoids. They're sort of in the top tier. You've also got things like, say, tazarotene. You've also got maybe a brand name like Aklief, Aklief. These are prescription only. Now, you may say, well, if they're so much stronger, why aren't people using them? Well, there's legislation which says, and it's pretty much the same in every country, there's legislation which says if it's a particular type of molecule, then it has to be prescription only. And the problem with that is in many countries, not every country, but in many countries, you're not allowed to advertise POMs, prescription only medicines. So, for example, here in the UK, as you can tell by my accent, we can't even advertise things like Botox, as an example, technically. Now, you may have seen adverts for it, but technically, that's not right, because it's a prescription-only medicine. Whereas in the US, as an example, as far as I'm aware, I don't live there, obviously, there are TV adverts where they advertise Botox openly. And that's a big, big difference. So different countries have different legislations, which means you'll see certain ends or certain types of retinoids advertised more freely than others or more commonly than others. Doesn't mean that because something is advertised more commonly, that it's actually better for you or stronger or going to give you a quicker result. That's all down to the chemistry and what you're actually using and whether it's right for you. What you see in the marketing is very often not, it's not reflective of the truth, or however you interpret it. And so if you want to go over the counter, you're looking at things like retinol, you're looking at things like retinaldehyde, which come in varying concentrations as well. If you want to step it up, then you need to see someone like your local dermatologist or see your GP to get referred. Some GPs, general practitioner, they can prescribe for you as well. I prescribe for my patients, and we do sometimes go for retinoids, top tier in terms of relative to over the counter or prescription only retinoids, I should say. And they can work, But here's the thing about retinoids. I personally feel they are overhyped a little bit. For example, let's say you look at tretinoin. There's multiple concentrations generally available. Now, you can compound and make whatever concentration you want, but typically there's 3 tiers of concentrations. And each one basically doubles. So you've got 0.025, 0.05, and then 0.1. Now, in the long term, I think many people would agree that whether you use the lowest tier or concentration or the highest tier, after, let's say, a year, 2 years, whatever time frame you want to pick, you probably won't be able to tell the difference whether they use the lowest or the highest, because it's going to be the same. So don't feel as though you have to get the highest concentration if you're going to do it. And the same for the retinol. If you go for a lower concentration retinol, doesn't mean you're going to get less of a result. If you go in the long term, a year, 2 years, I think realistically, no one's going to know which concentration, or be able to guess which concentration you used, because you've now used it in the longer term. So you've had good nourishment for long enough such that even if you only drip fed a small amount of vitamin A, your skin can still improve because it's happening over a long period of time. And so if you're going to use something like this, I don't think you should expect any significant results in the short term. In the short term, the issue with retinoids is you can get things like retinol burn. That's a real thing. You can have a look at it. You can Google it. And you also get, generalized retinoid reactions, because that's a lot of vitamin A. And, the way it works, these retinoids are really going after a particular receptor on the nuclear envelope called RAR gamma, retinoic acid receptor gamma. And overagonization of that receptor is not a good thing. Hence why if we have an extraordinarily high dose of vitamin A, of retinoids, to try and treat acne in the form of something like roaccutane or isotretinoin as an example, sometimes you've got to look at liver function tests just to make sure the liver's healthy, because it's a massive strain on the liver. And that tells you that we're not designed to have extraordinarily high doses of vitamin A to any cell in the body. It's meant to be in a physiological dose, not a super physiological dose. And so that's one of the issues I have with retinoids. And as well as that, it's never really going to fully tighten everything. Let's say you've got a gel, and we're going to go through some pictures of gels. I think the issue is, even if you use a good quality retinol or tretinoin or adapalene or whatever you're thinking of using, if you have a gel and you start to use that and you look at yourself maybe a year later, year and a half, the gel may be slightly higher, but I think it's still there. I think the quality of the skin overlying the gel may improve, but the gel itself, I think, is still going to be there. And so I think retinoids on their own, I don't think they're this royalty of skincare, if you like. They do work. It absolutely work. There's a reason we use them in acne very often. I've used it for acne in the past, and I think it works very well. But I don't think in the long term they're any better or any worse than other therapies, which we're going to go into today. And retinoids, if you're interested, they really first came to the fore in skincare in the 1980s, thanks to a guy called Des Fernandez, who is a really great doctor. He was a plastic surgeon. He's still around today, at least at the time of this recording. I hope he's around for much longer. He's South African. I think he still lives in Cape Town, if I'm not mistaken. And we owe a lot of the vitamin A in skincare thanks to Des Fernandez. And he's written some really great papers on microneedling as well, which we'll touch on today. And I think Des hit on something really quite extraordinary to look at the effects of vitamin A. But I think there are better ways. And I'm definitely in the minority when I say I don't think vitamin A is the king of skincare or the queen of skincare. I don't mean to be sexist. I think there's better ways out there, which I'm going to touch on now. But please understand that I'm definitely in the minority when I'm about to say what I'm about to say, but I have my reasons as well, and it's open for discussion. I'm always open to changing my mind. So as you can see, that the next thing there is B3/NAD+. Now, B3, I'm talking about vitamin B3. You may know it in a skincare context as niacinamide. Now, I put NAD+ because NAD+, if you've into the wellness industry or anti-aging, you've probably heard of NAD+, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and the plus represents an electrical charge. Its partner, its reduced form, is the NADH, and they work in tandem. One is oxidized, one is reduced. NAD+ is the oxidized form. So what we want to do is understand the difference between this and retinoids for the purpose of this video. Now, retinoids are purely vitamin A. Vitamin B3, I think, is a much more, for me personally, a much more fascinating molecule. When I use NAD+ clinically, okay, I've seen extraordinary things. I've seen cases where people's Alzheimer's starts to lessen. People's Parkinson's starts to lessen. Neurodegenerative disorders in general start to improve, or patients' day-to-day life starts to improve in those kinds of disorders. I see patients take it, their hair starts to grow more, their nails start to grow more, their skin starts to improve very, very rapidly. And I could go on and on and on. I actually teach NAD+. I'm one of the only people in the UK who teaches the use of NAD plus clinically, especially from clinical experience as well. And I teach it literally down to not even an atomic, but a subatomic level. I love the molecule. I think it's incredible. You have to be sensible. You can't just shove loads of it in like it's nothing. Like, you will disturb something called a redox potential. And so you have to know what you're doing if you're going to be using it clinically. But the reason I mention that is because it's a derivative of vitamin B3. And so when we give people large amounts of vitamin A, we find that it can be enormous stress on the liver. Hence, it's not an easy decision to give someone Roaccutane, and you have to make sure their liver can handle that amount of vitamin A. And when we look at vitamin B3 in the form of NAD, we find extraordinary changes, like what I've just said. And I feel as though we should, as a community, we should pay attention to that. We should see that when you give NAD, the whole body does miraculous things, and things which you almost can't explain, and ridiculous disorders start to improve. Whereas when we give large amounts of vitamin A, yes, we can see improvement in things like this, the skin in acne, but it's a stress on the liver, and we don't find nearly as miraculous and fascinating and amazing changes as we do with NAD+. And so on that basis, I personally feel as though when it comes to skincare, that B3 is the royalty of skincare for me, relative to retinoids. Like I said, I'm in the minority thinking that, but that's my reasoning. I'm more than happy to change my mind. Comment below and let me know what you think. When I use this clinically, I have patients who respond extremely well to niacinamide. And it's no wonder for me, because NAD is a derivative of vitamin B3. And that niacinamide, I think, is much more easily available than high-strength retinoids. You can compound niacinamide if you wish, go to 5%, 10%, something like that. But you also don't have that risk of retinoid reactions that you do with niacinamide. Now, if you put too high a concentration, it may feel like a stinging sensation. Just drop the concentration, and it's not really much of an issue. If you're going to buy a ready-made concentration in a cream, my advice to you is buy the highest concentration. Doesn't matter if you're sensitive, just buy the highest concentration and then dilute it at home. So, for example, I believe the Inky List, I have no connection to the company, they have a product which is 20% niacinamide. Now, I haven't looked into it. I don't know if it's any good, but I know they have a product, I've been told anyway, they have a product that's niacinamide and it's 20% concentration. So just get that. And let's say, for instance, you want it to be 10% instead. Get a specific amount of that 20% and the same amount of just a plain moisturizer, if you like. And then when you mix it together, you've halved that concentration down to 10%. And then add the same amount again, you can halve it down to 5%. And so with that kind of methodology, you can actually create whatever concentration you want just by buying the most expensive, instead of constantly buying different bottles every time that work their way up. And you can do that with anything that's a high concentration, to be fair. But that's why I think if I had to pick between retinoids and B3, I would go with the B3 personally. And when you understand the fact that B3, and this is a little bit technical, apologies if even you don't want to know technical knowledge, but skip this if you want, but B3's ability to work in tandem with enzymes like PARPs, poly-ADP ribose polymerases, these are enzymes which are really useful in the kind of repair of DNA. There's a lot of research going into this. Part of my job is to look at this field of cell function. When I'm a consultant in biotech research, like I said, my specialty is proteomics and bioenergetics. So really looking at mitochondrial function and the results of good and bad mitochondrial function. And PARP enzymes are something which we've looked into massively. And they're fueled by NAD, believe it or not. So no wonder niacinamide tends to have a really good effect on the skin. So that's B3. I hope that's given a sort of good overview. Retinoids typically are going to be more expensive, depending on where you go, obviously. If you're going for that top tier versus an easy niacinamide product. The way I get my patients to use niacinamide is I typically tell them to go to The Ordinary. I'm sure many of you have heard of them. And they have a product which is a niacinamide powder. Now, the reason I like that very much is because it's pure. There's no additives, there's no preservatives, there's no nasty gunk in there at all. It's just pure niacinamide. And you get that in the UK at least, I think for like £5, like, I don't know, what is that, $6, $7? It's really, really cheap. And what I do is I tell my patients, well, you've got an enormous amount of niacinamide there. and you've got whatever concentration you like, because you just mix that in whatever cream you want to blend it into, like a bog standard moisturizer cream, and you can make any concentration you like. You don't have to buy one product that's 1%, 2%, 5%, whatever. You can change it within the day if you want. You don't have to buy anything else. And so it's very, very cheap. It's very, very customizable, and it's not got anything in there other than the actual niacinamide. It's very finely sieved. I think it's like a 325 mesh. So it mixes very, very easily depending on what you're doing. Niacinamide is water soluble because of the hydrogen that's in there. Because of the hydrogen bonding that's created between the molecule and its environment. So you can try and mix it with something like squalane oil, which I've had patients do in the past. And the reason we do that is because it's just so cheap. But if you want to mix it with something that's water-based, you could use just plain water, or you could use a water-based moisturizer, and it's going to mix a little bit easier. If you do with the squalane oil, yes, it can mix, but it's going to be a little bit grainy on your skin. But it's up to you. It's not going to harm you. You can go for it and try different ones. The beauty of this method is that it's so cheap, and this is why I like it. And my patients trust me when I recommend this, because I don't sell it. I can't sell it because it's not me that makes it. It's just online. They order it for a few pounds, and then they're done. So moving on from that, we've got another option here, which is TP. This is testosterone propionate. No, not testosterone to change testosterone in the body, something completely different. Testosterone for the skin, not the body. So I'll leave a link in the description to a video really going into detail on this. I made a video last year where I found some old research where they used testosterone in a specific form where there was no systemic effects or changes seen, and you were only seeing changes where it was applied. And that form is the propionate, okay? Because propionate breaks down very quickly. That's why it's not that useful in systemic whole body testosterone replacement therapy. But in skincare, it seems to work really well. This is something which, in the original study, there's actually microscope images of the skin to show you the huge, absolutely huge difference it made to the skin from before the treatment started to after. And you can see the massive thickness increase, number of cells has increased, the density of the cells, the epidermal protection barrier, that's massive now. And that's important because that's not an opinion. Typically in modern day skincare studies are 80% of patients said they loved it after 12 weeks, or 90% of patients said they would buy it again after 8 weeks. That's just an opinion. It's subjective. But to actually see the quantitative increase in cell numbers, cell density, skin thickness, all these measurable, quantifiable metrics that speak about skin quality, that's not very common. And yet in that study, which you can watch for yourself, that particular product did exactly that. And it was done on people, close to 90 years old, if I remember correctly. And they were seen for, I think it was 5 years. Was it 5 years? 2 years or 5 years, I can't remember off the top of my head, but multiple years they were followed up for, not 8 weeks or 12 weeks like you see in modern day skincare adverts. And it was massive, massive changes. And what you'll also see on screen now, this side or this side, I don't know what it will be, is testimonials from people in my online school group where I teach, topics like this multiple times a week to both members of the public and healthcare professionals. And they are talking about their experiences of certain treatments, certain skincare, including using testosterone propionate. And you can see them showing, their experiences with it. Now, it's not a miracle cream. It's not going to work for everyone. Indeed, there are people who have noticed no results. I'm going to be very frank about that. But that's the same with every skincare. Every skincare is going to have people that it works great on. There's going to be some people that doesn't work at all on, and maybe some people will have a bit of a reaction. Even the testosterone propionate, 2 people had an irritation reaction, which seems like they were irritated by the carrier, not the actual testosterone propionate itself. So be aware of that. And it's not for everyone. There are medical contraindications as well. It's not for anyone who has any skin condition, eczema, psoriasis, acne, whatever. You can't have anything. It's just purely anti-aging. And there are risks as well. So hair growth is definitely a risk. Some people like that because there are some female patients in my online school group who you can meet if you join. They are specifically using it on their eyebrows, and it's working really well. Things are coming back apparently. Some people are in the process of taking pictures as well. It might be up by the time you see this. What else? And I would say, if you've got any condition, it's not for you. If you have existing acne, especially if you put it on, I think it can exacerbate that acne. If you want to try it, you can see your local dermatologist. Just send them the study that is I'll link to in the video in the description. You can watch that whole video. The study is in there as well. If they won't do it for you, you can get a second opinion. It's entirely up to you. I do this online for all my patients, and then obviously they're in the school group as well. So if you can't get it from a local dermatologist, I'm available, but see your local dermatologist first, because honestly, it's going to be cheaper if you see someone local, and it's going to be much, much easier for you. So I'm a big fan of that. That's the only skincare that I personally use on my own face. And with the testimonials that you've seen on screen, I'm sure you can see why as well. An issue that some people have is, what if it affects my body? Well, we've got people who have hormone replacement therapy. And the good thing about that is you have regular tests to see what your levels are. And those patients are really useful in this context, because when they start the cream, what you would expect to see is a huge, massive, massive spike when the cream starts, but it's not there. And there are people who have blood tests during HRT, and they can see everything is still the same. And again, that's if you want to join in my school group, that's there as well. And again, the reason is because it's propionate. It's very, very quickly broken down, and the concentration is as low as 1%. If you're looking at systemic hormone replacement therapy like TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, you may be looking at something like 20% concentration. This is 1, to give you an idea. And these people who you see in the original study, where it was rubbed on the skin, they did it on 1/2, which you probably won't be able to do nowadays as a study. But the effects were only seen on that half, nowhere else. And even the patients in my online school group who are purposely using it for eyebrows, the effects are only being seen on their eyebrows, nowhere else. So have a look at that. I think it's amazing once you see the before and after pictures. I use it myself, and I'm a very cynical person, as regular viewers of the channel will know, and I love it. But like I said, not for everyone. Do your homework, see someone local. If not, I'm available, entirely up to you. As well as that, we have vitamin C, which everyone seems to go on about. And vitamin C, I don't think is really anything to shout about, frankly. It's used as part of the process of neocollagenesis, which is the making of new collagen fibers. But just vitamin C on its own doesn't change much on your face, I believe, because vitamin C is a cofactor, which means that you need lots of other steps in order to have the output or the outcome of great quality skin, with all the different parameters that make up great quality skin, however you want to define them as. And so if you just have one of those requirements, how much are you really going to achieve? I personally don't feel a great deal. Think about it this way. If you have a recipe to make a cake, and you got ingredient A, B, C, D, if you then have a massive amount of vitamins, ingredient C, so call it that, but then A, B, and D are still the same amount, then you can still only make the same number of cakes, because you're limited by how much A, B, and D you have. So if you just shove in a whole load of vitamin C, you're going to hit what's called a rate limiting step in biochemical terms. And so vitamin C, I think, can help in some contexts with other things, but on its own, I'm not that impressed. I don't think it's that great. Yes, you will see some benefit. I'm sure you will. People all over the world will use it and they like it. But I don't think it's as good as the previous 3 that I personally mentioned. And I put ... because there's so many other things. We can look at peptides, we can look at growth factors, all these other things. But I think the principle still applies. None of them are going to lift your face. None of them are going to replace a scalpel or an energy device or anything like that. And at the end of the day, I personally feel, those first 3 are really the only ones worth talking about nowadays, at least. But again, if you use something different, you want to mention something to share, please put it down in the comments. I'll have a look. Maybe I can make a video about that as well. I would love to know. So I hope that gives you a good idea of the skincare options and why I'm a little bit cynical that they can replace other options, but they can help other options as well. And different ones will be right for different people with different medical conditions, different medical histories, etc., etc. So now, as you can see on screen, I want to look at supplements as well. Now, in brackets, I've got the words control and diet. These are really key points to mention. Very, very, very key. And they kind of help you decipher all the masses and oceans of marketing that's out there. So the word control means that there is no control when it comes to supplements. There is no control. And what I mean by that is, if you were doing a scientific experiment, and in this experiment you were changing some variables to observe what would happen. If you only change one variable and the outcome changes, you know that change is due to the variable that you manipulated because nothing else was changed. Sounds patronizing and obvious, I know, but bear with me. Well, when it comes to taking a supplement, you can never prove cause and effect in terms of taking the supplement and any improvement in the skin because you take the supplement, but the rest of your diet is completely different amongst all the participants in the study. The amount of sunshine that they get is completely different. The medication they may be taking, their 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year life history leading up to that point is entirely different. So there are so many confounding variables. When you look at supplements, I personally believe it is impossible. It is practically and logistically impossible to prove cause and effect between any particular supplement, in this context at least, and an improvement in skin quality. And so for me, I don't think there's any evidence out there that's really worth anything, unless you're looking at some kind of biochemistry study, which is different. But in terms of skin observation and things like that, I think that's another thing entirely. So with no control, I don't see any good evidence for any kind of supplements. And at the end of the day, this is going to sound even more patronizing, I apologize, but what is a supplement? Okay, this is where the second word in the brackets comes into play, diet. If you need a supplement, what that means is your diet isn't good enough because you should be getting everything from your diet. And so I think instead of a supplement, if it turns out you need one, doesn't mean you should go and get one. It means you need to alter your diet so that you don't need one anymore. That's the way I work with all my patients. If it turns out there's a deficiency, I don't say, well, go and buy the supplement. I say, well, why is there a deficiency? What are you not doing or eating that means you've got low levels of this? Let's change that. And then instead of making you buy a supplement every month, let's just make you not need to buy anything every month as a supplement. And so I think if you're looking at supplements, frankly, it's not worth it for me. I don't think there's any good skin supplements out there, personally. Nutraceuticals, on the other hand, are a different category. A supplement is something that replaces, part of your diet or supplements your diet, which means you're not getting it in your diet. A nutraceutical is entirely different. A nutraceutical is something which simply improves the way your body is working, your physiological function. So it's nothing to do with missing something in your diet. It's to do with improving the way you are doing things while in a state of not having any deficiencies because you don't need any supplementation. Nutraceuticals, now that's a massive video by itself. I personally feel there's only a handful maximum that are actually worth it in any way. And I'm sure I will be doing more videos on that together. But supplements, I'm too cynical to agree that any of them really are worth their money when it comes to skin tightening or skin lifting, whatever you want to call it or think of it as. So I think that's finished off supplements. There's not a huge amount to say, as you can tell. But I want to touch on devices as well. Now, this is what you need to understand before we look into specific ones. Is this is a huge industry. I don't know how much it's worth. Many, many billions, I assume. But what happens is manufacturers will see that and they will simply rush to make something to sell, regardless of whether it's the best, because they just want to tap into that market. And I want to tell you how they get away with this sometimes, okay? Now, if you look at a vodka brand called Grey Goose, this, in taste tests, blind taste tests, it doesn't always get ranked top. In fact, many taste tests that I've seen, it just gets ranked near the bottom. But in terms of the way people perceive it, they perceive it as probably the most luxurious and the top one out there. How does that work? Well, because I think the guy was called Sidney Frank. I may be wrong on that, or Frank Sidney, apologies if you're watching. But he came up with the brand, I think, in the 90s. And he simply focused on marketing it really well and building a really great story about the brand. And that's why it's got that French flag. France is seen as, it's a home of luxury goods, a home of fashion and wine, all these things. And so he pitched it in that way and did lots of other things, which I would never have thought of myself. And he made the audience, made the market perceive it in a particular way. And even though it ranks relatively low on certain blind taste tests, it sold incredibly well, and it made it its way into many, many hip hop videos, and it does very, very well. It sold it for several billion later. And so the story there is you can have a product which is mediocre, but if you market it and place it right in the market, you can make people perceive it to be something completely different to what it actually is. And when it comes to devices, many, many manufacturers, I personally believe, will play that game. they will do that Grey Goose model, which was very successful, to be fair to the guy, and he made a lot of money. But, they will make something which I think is mediocre. I think everything's mediocre, let's be honest. But they will market it so well that you think it's incredible. And members of the public, without the experience that I have, they sometimes are not able to sort of really put two and two together and analyze it critically and put difficult questions to the manufacturer, which shows the product is actually not that great. And so bear that in mind when you look at all these sorts of things. My general advice is when you look at a device, like an energy device, you want to look at something where they're very open and transparent about the stats and the specification and the metrics, almost in a way that to most people it wouldn't make sense. But it's like credit cards, Many people don't understand I don't understand all the ins and outs of credit cards and all the fancy terminology and numbers, but I know what the APR is. If one credit card has a 10% APR and another one has a 25% APR, you don't have to be a genius, because they're using the same stat, the same metric, so that all you have to do is look at which number is bigger. And that's a cheap way to try and compare certain devices where you've got, say, energy being emitted in some way. You look for stats which are universal amongst all devices, such as the fluence. You can Google that if you wish. It's a measure of how much energy is delivered per unit surface area on the skin in a particular amount of time. So joules per square centimeter, per second, or per minute, whatever you want to do. And when you have that metric being published by multiple manufacturers, now you can compare. Because now you don't need the marketing. You don't need to pay attention to which celebrity posted it or how much it costs. You can see the actual metric, and then like credit cards, you can compare and know with 100% certainty which can output more or less. So try and find stats which are similar. It's not easy, I'm not going to lie, because a lot of manufacturers don't publish these things at all. And it's really, really obvious that they've got something to hide, at least it's to me. So bear that in mind when you look at devices. It's a growing industry. People want to jump in. They can make a mediocre thing look amazing, and you really need to try and find certain stats which help you decipher certain things. And I'm sure I'm going to do many more videos about that to help you find those stats. And in fact, that's one of the topics we covered recently in the online school group, which is in the description if you want to join, where I teach how we compare these things. So we'll start off with something very, very basic, which isn't even electronic. It's a basic Dermaroller. I made a video, I think it was last year at time of recording, showing a Dermaroller technique and why I think Dermarollers are so fantastic and microneedling is so fantastic. The first thing is it's so incredibly cheap, right? I pick a Dermaroller up from Amazon for probably £7. It's not the sharpest needles in the world. It's not made out of 24 karat gold. But that's fine. I'm going to use it a few times and then put it in the bin because it's only £7 and I can just get another one. And so Dermarollers, I think, for what you get, if used appropriately and safely, for the amount you pay, I think that return on investment, that value for money is extraordinary. I think one of the reasons people don't generally talk about it, and forgive me if I'm being cynical, but I think it's that there's not a huge amount of money to be made in it, so it doesn't get much airtime. But the guy that invented vitamin A in skincare, which I mentioned previously in this video, Des Fernandez, it's the same guy that invented microneedling. Okay, he saw the effect that tattoo guns had when the needles were going in and out all the time. And I believe it was 1996 when he came up with this idea of microneedling and dermarolling. And that's where it basically came from. It's not been around forever. It's been around since relatively recently-ish. It's probably the 30th anniversary next calendar year at the time of recording. And when you make these microscopic wounds, it's like a light prickling stimulation. It's not a massive amount of damage, like a CO2 laser, which just burns off all of the skin. So because it's very light, you get this stimulation effect and you get this growth. Think of it as when you go to the gym, yes, you damage your muscle by breaking the fiber, but you're not damaging your body. You're not getting it to the point where you're going to have a serious injury. You're breaking the fiber enough to cause a change, but not enough that it actually causes damage to your body and your physiological function. And that nice balance is what you want so that you then grow. And microneedling is similar. It's like going to the gym, if you like, for your skin. And it's giving these tiny, tiny prickles onto the skin that act like a weighted exercise where you break the muscle fiber. You're just creating tiny, tiny microscopic wounds, and your skin is seen that as some kind of collagen induction therapy. In fact, it was called CIT for a long time, collagen induction therapy. Many people even call it that. There's a particular Dermaroller called the Roll Kit, Roll-CIT, collagen induction therapy. And this, I think, is extraordinary for what you can do. And you can do it at home. A lot of people will tell you you can't do it at home because it's unsafe. You know, I've been getting patients to do it at home for over 10 years, and I've never had anyone that's followed the instructions had any kind of issue. You know, some people do stupid things like, if I say keep going until you're pink in the skin, some people will for some reason Dermaroll for like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and yes, they have an issue because they didn't listen properly, they didn't do the instructions properly. Whereas if you follow the instructions and you do it very safely, I think you get fantastic results, really, really fantastic results. Now, how do you treatment plan this? Well, that's different for each person. As a rough guide, you know, you don't want to go too shallow, otherwise you don't get enough depth to really cause a change in the skin. But you don't want to go too deep to the point where you're actually genuinely causing damage. You're beyond stimulation and just going into damage. Where that is depends on the skin thickness for each person, because the length of the needle corresponds to how deep it goes. So if your skin is thinner, the same needle size on someone else, probably going to be too deep for you. So you've got to weigh it out a little bit. But I will leave that video where I really talked about this in the description for you to have a look as well. And in fact, if you want to know how I do it in much more detail in terms of different parts of the face, in my school group, in the paid school group there, if you click on Classroom in the live calls archive, you can actually see all the live calls that we've done in the past, like a massive database of so many different topics. And one of them is a live dermarolling demo where I did every single part of the face and the neck and show you exactly how it's done. So Dermaroller, I've got a runny nose, as you can tell. Dermaroller, brilliant, 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 but you have to use it in an appropriate way. Then we have RF, so home RF. RF is radio frequency. These are devices that are essentially putting out radio frequency into the skin, and what they're trying to do is essentially transfer radio frequency such that it causes damage. Again, it causes what we call coagulation, coagulation. And coagulation is where, think of it as kind of like a blood clot or a scab forms under the skin. And you've got this sort of soup of dead cells and cleaved proteins and damaged structures everywhere, all combined together. The body thinks, oh, Jesus, what have we got here? Let's sweep all that in the bin, make brand new stuff here, brand new cellular architecture to replace all of that. So that's the theory. You know, you take it away and you put brand new stuff in. Here's the issue I have with that in general. Number one, if your skin is not that great, and it isn't because you wouldn't be having that treatment in the first place, if it's not that great, and then you cause damage as well, what do you think the ability of that not great skin is to respond to complete damage? I don't think it's that great, okay, at best. And that's why typically in a clinic, you're going to need multiple sessions of RF. And that's one of the options I'm going to talk about today. But that's even in a clinic. Now, remember when I said in skincare, if you can buy something in a shop, not that strong. If it's prescription only, it's a tier up and it's much stronger, hence why you need the prescription. If you can get an RF device at home, then realistically, you know, no matter what you think, it's not that strong. Otherwise, it wouldn't be available for home use. You know, think of the amount of people with no medical training whatsoever. They have to use this device, which is basically a medical device at the end of the day, without causing all sorts of problems. To make it that safe, you've got to really tone it down so much that it passes enough tests to be sold into the home consumer market. And I'm telling you now, no home RF device is very powerful. You may see people who comment and say, oh, it worked for me. But, you know, how do you know it's that device and not the skincare they're using and all these other things? Because typically, if the sort of person who buys that device, you're also the sort of person that's got a load of skincare as well. And so I'm not convinced on RF. At the end of the day, it's causing damage, right? It's causing coagulation. We talk about anti-aging, and there's a term thrown around in the anti-aging industry, which I see, you know, all over the place, and they call it inflammaging. Okay, inflammation and anti-aging or aging. It basically speaks to the fact that inflammation is a big driver of aging. And I don't think many people disagree with that. In fact, I'm sure it's universally accepted and agreed upon. Well, if that's the case, why are we also recommending treatments that are inflammatory in their nature? That makes no sense. You know, you look at certain injectables, which I'll show you today as well, which rely on inflammation. Well, how can an industry promote an inflammatory treatment and also promote the idea, the I think correct idea, that inflammation is bad for aging? Or which is it? You know, and when it comes to RF, you're relying on a lot of heat going into the skin to cause inflammation. I think it's nonsense, frankly. Some would agree, some would disagree. It's fine. It's open for discussion. Let me know what you think in the description below. So RF, personally, I feel save your money. LED. So LED is, I think it's a great option, but I don't think it's going to significantly change the tightness or the lift or the sagginess of your face, at least not in the short term. Now, why is LED even on this list? Well, you have to understand what LED is able to achieve. It's completely unique in its mechanism of action. We have the ability with modern technology now that to do things which would have amazed people 100 years ago or 200 years ago. We know that cells exist. And if you told someone 200 years ago, we can hold an individual cell on the end of a probe, they go, no, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. But we can do that. We can hold an individual egg and then artificially inseminate it. Now, we can hold that. But we can't go inside a cell and move things around to where they should be and go back out. If you've got a pair of tweezers to do that, the moment you go in, you just destroyed the cell. So we can hold a cell, but we can't reach in it with our proverbial hand and sort of just move things around and then come out like there's nothing happened. The moment you go into the cell, it's destroyed. The constituents are just exploded everywhere. Unless you use LED, and this is why I think it's so unique. Instead of using a random hypothetical set of tweezers to go inside a cell and move things around, we can use radiation, which is even smaller than a full-size atom. And so that radiation goes into the cell, hits something, that then goes like a set of dominoes that, starts a chain reaction and sets off a chemical process. And then you make this happen, or you make that happen, or you stop something specific from happening if it's the anti-inflammatory. And that's what LED is. That's what it's doing. It's a way of getting intracellular tweezers to move things into particular ways. And different wavelengths move different things. So I'll put it to you this way. Imagine I'm the radiation. What I do is I go around and knock on people's doors. If I knock on this person's door and I'm lost, they might open it and they say, oh, come in, have a cup of tea. I'll show you where to go. If I knock on that particular door, maybe there's no one in. And so I get this, I'm doing the same thing, but at completely different results, depending on which door I knock on. So the radiation is going to knock on particular doors. Some doors it might do nothing. Some doors it might make that happen. Some doors it might make something bad happen, whatever. And different radiation exists. We have different wavelengths. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but that's where we are with LED. And if you do that appropriately and safely in a way that's right for you, there are medical contraindications to LED treatment, for example, then what you can do is optimize that cell function. You can optimize the output of that cell, such as the proteins that it's making, like collagen, like elastin, like perlecan and nitrogen and all these other things. And if you're able to do that consistently and over a long period of time, you can try and stave off some of that aging process and really improve the quality of the skin. But is it going to lift a jowl back up into your face? I don't think so. I think it's really fantastic for treating skin conditions. I use it all the time for skin conditions, especially inflammatory conditions. And again, it's like skincare. I think it goes as an adjunct to other things to improve the outcome of other things. If that cell function is optimized, the inflammation is optimized, i.e. reduced as much as possible. When you then go to other treatments, like let's say a laser as an example, the laser is causing damage to an organ which is now super healthy. So it can take that damage and actually respond to it really well. Whereas if you do something like RF, just plain straight out the bat, the radiofrequency, and you really damage skin, which is already damaged, which is why they came to you in the clinic, how good is it going to be to beat a dead horse? So LED, I think, can rejuvenate skin. RF causes damage. And the hope is that you recover from that damage. With LED, there's no damage to be done as long as you use it appropriately. You're just going up. You're not going down before you go up. And that's a really big difference. So for me, LED is great. Personally, there's really only two brands that I talk about and that I think are worth it. One is Dermalux, which is typically used in a clinic. And so the top of the range one is, you're looking at probably just over £20,000. That's not for the home market. Clearly, obviously, for a clinic. And then they've got a smaller version that is for the home market. You're looking at a ballpark figure, something like £2,000, depending on where you get it from. I think in its category, that is the most powerful that you can get in that category, but it's £2,000. And so another brand that I think is also very good is called StylePro, STYLPRO. If you look on my channel, I did a podcast episode. I'll probably link it in the description for you. But I did a podcast episode just based on that mask because I think it's so fantastic. And if I'm not mistaken, that is the most powerful LED mask in the world in terms of how much energy is output per unit surface area. And it's also one of, if not the cheapest out there at the same time. So it may not last forever. You may have a bulb go after, a year or something like that, but you can afford to bin that after a year and buy the same one again. And you've still spent less than something multiple times the price to start with. And so that's why I think it's so great. In the UK, I had a patient recently pick one up for £70, which is what, $85, something like that. In the US, you can convert it for your own currency. But I think the value for money is brilliant, really, really brilliant. And how you treatment plan it, again, it's dependent on your individual history, your medical conditions, all these sorts of things. I can't treatment plan the entire world in one video. But that's a very good return on investment, I think. If you can pick one up for £70, £80, brilliant. The Radiofrequency, again, at home in terms of costs, you're probably looking at something along the lines of a couple £100. I don't think it's worth it, frankly. Dermaroller, like I said, I get mine for about £7 off Amazon. The most I've seen any of my patients get one is probably about £10, £12. Has nothing, absolutely nothing. So if you're going to buy home devices, keep it nice and cheap so you maximize your return on investment and you get maximum value for money. I don't think there's any expensive home devices really worth buying unless you can afford a Dermalux Flex, which is that home version that I think is that most highly powered in its category. But if you've got that Sculptra LED mask, you use that well enough, in the long term, you're still going to get a fantastic result. And the price difference is very, very large. But those two brands, I think, at the moment, at the time of recording at least, in their categories, the best LED devices that I've seen and used and experienced with my patients as well over all these years. And then we've got, frankly, nonsense. You can see on this list, face yoga / exercises. One of the things we talk about is in this industry is tightening the skin. And so it stands to reason anything which stretches the skin is going to do the opposite of tightening. It's going to loosen it. So if you keep stretching your face or you keep moving the skin about here and there and you're stretching it, how can that tighten? How can you tighten something by loosening it? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So there's not a huge amount to say on this except don't do it. I mean, I'll put it this way, right? If you think Botox is anti-aging and it works by stopping movement, how is it anti-aging to exacerbate the movement at the same time? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And I think it's just rubbish. So yeah, please don't do it. There's much better options out there. And so now we're going to leave the home section behind and we're going to go to the clinic section. So in clinic, we're going to go first into the non-surgical section. And this is probably where the bulk of the options lie, as I'm sure you would probably expect nowadays. And I'm going to go through not every single one, obviously. We will be here for many, many days. And I don't think my hard drive on the camera is big enough. But I've picked the most commonly used and asked about in my career that I've seen. And some which are picking up a bit of sort of marketing momentum at the time of recording as well. And I'm going to say things about these injectables, some of which may seem surprising to you. And I'm going to sound very factual and very authoritative on some of these things. And I don't do that lightly. If I say, for example, this injectable makes this protein, but not that protein, I please invite you to email the manufacturer and check that for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Don't think just because I've made a video on something, that's the truth, okay? There are other opinions out there. And you should always look at a couple of different opinions and come to your own conclusion. My opinions are quite often in the minority of things. But here, when I say a fact and not an opinion, I'll make it very, very clear. And I think that's the best way to compare things. For example, coming back to that credit card analogy, your opinion can be that this credit card is better than that one, but factually, it's got a higher APR, a higher interest rate. So actually, it's more expensive and it's going to cost you more and you're potentially going to be worse off as a result of that. And so factually speaking, this has a lower interest rate than that one. And we can compare injectables in similar ways. Factually speaking, this injectable can produce things that no other injectable can produce. And I'm going to show you that today. And I'm going to talk about multiple options here. And if you think I'm biased in any of them, that's absolutely fine. But when I speak factually, please remember that the facts are still the facts. If I say injectable A does this, and this, and injectable B does none of that, there's no bias there. Because if that's a fact, it doesn't matter whether I say it or someone else says it. So please look at this in an objective manner as possible. Lots of people can have opinions, which is why I'm going to try and avoid opinions in this injectable section. Conflict of interest disclosure. The first injectable I'm going to talk about, I was a customer and using that probably about 3 years ago for the first time. And I thought it was amazing. And I started shouting about it everywhere and telling everyone. And I shouted so loud, metaphorically, that the company had heard of me, and it opened up a conversation and became good friends. And now I teach that particular injectable all around the world. I've taught doctors, nurses, dentists, pharmacists, surgeons, dermatologists, everywhere, many, many countries. However, to avoid the bias coming through on that, because I am biased, I love that product. But to offset that, I'm going to try and speak just factually, such that, like I said, whether I say it or you say it or someone else says it, the same thing is still true. So bias is not coming into it. It's objective, not subjective. Here's the basis on which I suggest you guys eliminate bias, okay? This picture, which, should be in quite a large size across the screen now, is, you don't have to understand it fully, by the way, don't worry. This is the connection between the two layers of skin. It's called the DEJ, the dermo-epidermal junction. If you want to tighten your skin, this is the anatomy that we're actually trying to improve or increase, if you like, for want of a better word. And what I want you to see is there's no such thing as collagen, okay, per se, in this context. There's collagen type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., etc., etc. Many, many different types of collagens. And each one, as you can see here, does a different job in a different area. And you can't actually tighten skin with just collagen. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's not my opinion. It's anatomy, as you can see here. So why do so many companies just talk about collagen? Because that's all they can make. So if they can only make collagen, what will be the point in talking about all the other factors that go into tightening skin, when all that would achieve is for the public to realize not to buy their product because it doesn't make those things. And so this is how you get rid of the bias. You understand, forget the products, but the brand or the manufacturer, you just understand the anatomy. You just look at the anatomy and you say, what do I need as a matter of fact to tighten this? Make a list of the proteins. Okay, which product matches my list? You don't go to the product first, you go to the anatomy first. And this is what I teach when I teach in lots of different countries. And so all you can see, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but you can see multiple collagen types as well as other things. You've also got things that aren't even in the picture. For example, if you want elastic skin, let me give you a clue. It's not collagen that makes it elastic. It's elastin. Hence why it's been named elastin, because it gives the skin elasticity. Collagen is for structure and function. Elastin is purely for elastic recoil, and they work together along with a lot of other proteins that you can see here as well. Even fibronectin, right? Fibronectin is really crucial for stem cell differentiation. It's really crucial for wound healing. In fact, you can buy fibronectin on its own. I think there's a brand called Fibrega. You can buy it in certain countries. Never used it, but I know it's available because it's so good at wound healing. And you may think, well, who cares about wound healing? Oh, good skin. The cosmetic industry and the wound healing industry are the same industry. You're just talking about protein synthesis, whether it's to close a wound or to improve skin quality. As far as the cell is concerned, it's doing the same thing, just producing protein. And that's why you see so much crossover between wound healing and dermatology. It's basically the same thing when it comes to the cosmetic side. And so the way you should start by assessing an injectable is saying, which types of collagen does it produce? Because then, even if I am biased towards the one that I use, okay, and I will be, and this person are biased towards the ones that they use, you're sat there as a patient thinking, well, who the hell do I believe? Whereas if you go through this route, you don't have to believe anyone. You just say, which proteins do you make? They'll say this, they'll say that, I'll say this. And most answers are going to be the same in that regard. Very, very few, as you're about to see, factually, actually give you multiple different types. And then you're not relying on anyone's opinion. You're not relying on anyone saying, I think this is the best. You know which one makes more proteins than anyone else. And that's a fact. So look at that if you need to, and bear that in mind as we go forward. And you can, like I say, eliminate any bias from anyone instantly. So Sunekos. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you know that I love this stuff. I've spoken about it many, many times. I've made videos about it. And yes, I love it. And so, of course, I'm going to be biased. And like I said, but let's look at it without any room for bias. Let's ask objective questions so you can fact check me if I'm wrong on anything. Now, Sunekos makes multiple types of collagens. It also makes very large, in fact, in terms of the elastin and the fibronectin, it makes the most amount, or the type 4 collagen, type 7 collagen, and the elastin, it makes the most amount of any product in the world in a physiological way. And that's a bold statement, but it's not an opinion, it's a fact. And it is literally patented for that. They would not grant a patent if that was false, because you have to prove it. And so that's the case that it does those things, whether I say it or you say it or some random person off the street says it, it's still the same. That's why I say, look, understand my bias and look and try and find a way to analyze it without my bias affecting you. And that's how you do it. That fact is still the same, whether I say it or someone else says it, has the highest amount of those things. And so that on its own eliminates practically, well, nearly every injectable ever made, because there's very few that can compete with that. So it does the type 1 collagen, the type 3 collagen, the highest amount of the type 4, the type 7, the elastin, the fibronectin. I don't know any injectable in the world that has at least that size list and more. Literally can't think of a single one. Now, of course, though, I love this, so I'm going to be biased. Remember that. So if you want to find, if you think I'm wrong, please, I would genuinely love to know so I can use something better. Put in the comments if you can find another injectable that does at least all that and more. I don't think you'll find one because of the patents that exist, but feel free to show me and I would love to take a look. And like I say, change what I do clinically if there is something indeed better. Now, I want to show you some pictures as well. So this that you should see on the screen is not a combination of treatments. That is a single treatment. That's Sunekos. They had a course of 3 sessions, I believe, 2 weeks in between. And that was the result, you know. If someone said to you that was a surgical treatment, I'd probably believe them, frankly. If there wasn't a tattoo, or else a tattoo would look a bit stretched out as well. But that's extraordinary. You know, clinical results speak for themselves in this. And I'll show you another one. I won't go on forever. Again, this, if someone told me that was surgical, I would believe them. Both these cases are not my patients. I didn't even do the treatment, so there's no bias here either. The first picture was taken from Sunekos New Zealand Instagram page. Credit to the clinician that did that. And this one was taken from Dr. Estetica, who works in London, I believe. I can't remember. And that's taken off Instagram as well. So credit to both those people. And you can see the results. They speak for themselves. That's what happens when you create many, many different types of collagens and other proteins all at the same time. So let's go through these words here: the cost, time, invasiveness, risk, ingredients, experience. So when it comes to Sunekos, the cost is quite variable depending on which country you're in and which part of that country you're in. If you were going to do the full face, typically you will be looking, depending on where you go, full face, you're probably looking at anywhere from, say, 250, 300 at the bottom end, all the way up to, say, 800 to 900 at the top end, which is a huge range, really, really massive range. And that's to do with the great divide in income, shall we say, around the UK. If you were somewhere in central London, a very affluent area, somewhere like Harley Street, for example, you're going to be towards that top end. If you're somewhere in a very deprived area, you're going to be far closer to the bottom end. So it depends where you go. And also different clinicians have different levels of experience. Me personally, yes, I'm towards the top end, but that's because some of the techniques used in the product, I literally invented them. And I am, I believe, the most experienced user of this particular type of Sunekos now, the latest one, in the entire country. And as, you know, now a global key opinion leader within the cosmetic medicine industry, I have a tremendous amount of experience teaching as well. And I teach other doctors even how to use this. So my time is pretty full, I'm not going to lie. So for me, I'm more closer to the top end. But that's the range that you're looking at for the full face. In terms of time, you're looking at each session. For me personally, if I was to the full face, so from hairline down to chin, including the upper and lower eyelid, yes, you can do upper eye and lower eye as well. That whole thing is probably going to be in the region of about, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes total. So it's really not that slow at all. But the average number of sessions, you're looking at, say, 3 sessions as an average. Now, I have 7 patients in London. I'm sure some of you, 7 at least, are watching this. And these 7 patients have it every 2 weeks for life. The only time we don't do it is if I'm away in a different country or they're away in a different country, and we carry on every 2 weeks. Why is that? Well, we're coming on to the risk factor here, because there's no risk, right? And now we're coming on to the ingredients. The only ingredients in there are amino acids, which you can't be allergic to, because 17% of us roughly is protein, which is made of amino acids, 17, 18%, depending on which paper you like to quote. And the other ingredients in there is hyaluronic acid, but not like in filler, right? It's free hyaluronic acid, not linked. Hyaluronic acid is like my fingers here. In dermal fillers, they will be linked like this, so they create a structure like bricks in a wall, and they can support something. Whereas in Sunekos and in other products as well, it's free, so it's not linked, it's not cross-linked, so it's just floating about. And so when you put that in the skin, it's not going to stay. It's not filler. It is not filler. It will not volumize at all. It's going to go into the skin and it's going to be metabolized. Just like you put some food in your body, the food is metabolized. And so when you put this in there, there's nothing really to be allergic to. And the ingredients are pharmaceutical grade, not cosmetic grade. Understand the difference. And that's why this technology in its entire form, since its inception, not one single complication or adverse event ever recorded. Now, if it's used inappropriately, so for example, maybe there's some filler somewhere and you inject it into the filler or near the filler, the body might react to the filler and this because of the combination. That's something different. But genuine reaction to the product, if you use it properly, no, never been a single one ever, which is why I can't show you a result where it causes a reaction or causes a complication, because there aren't any. Even if you inject it into a blood vessel, if you put a filler in a blood vessel to blockage, worst case scenario, you could lose your vision. You could go permanently blind in both eyes. With this, if you get it into a blood vessel, nothing's cross-linked, right? So it's not going to block anything. It just flows out, and then you can massage it and inject again. You're absolutely fine. So it's a very, very safe product. Invasiveness, you're probably looking, standard needle procedure. Every time a needle goes into your skin, you might get a bruise, might get some bleeding, might get a little mark as it's healing. That's about it. Same with this, same with any other injectable like fillers, toxin, Botox, any other things. So standard risks of injection, not necessarily individual to the product. But in my experience, if you inject this product properly, there is no bruising and there is no prolonged swelling. Because if you're in the correct layer, there are no major blood vessels there. So you can't really nick a blood vessel and let blood pour out and get a bruise. So my entire experience with this, I've never had a bruise on any patient. I've never had prolonged swelling, ever. Not even in one single patient, because it's done properly, perfectly, every single time. And I can guarantee that if needed, because I've done it so many times. And again, that's why I teach it as well. Ingredients we've gone through as well. Experience. I've used this for about 3 years, something like that now, and it is now the only injectable that I use. Factually speaking, it can do things which no other injectable in the world can do, and you can double check that, because remember, I am biased. I love this product. I have a huge bias. And so you can fact check those things that I said. You can fact check the multiple types of collagens that it can produce. In fact, there's even more collagens that a company even knows about. I had a conversation with them and said, look, it's got to be producing this, this, and this. And they said, oh, we don't know. And I said, no, I'm telling you, it produces this, this, and this. They went and did some tests and they're like, oh, actually, Abs, you're right. It does do this, this, and this as well. That's going to be published later in the year at the time of recording. And that just adds to its list, which no one in the world, I think, can compete with. And like I said, go and fact check me. Find another product that can produce all these things at least and more. I don't think you'll find a single one. That's how you get rid of my bias and see for yourself through clear eyes. So I hope that gives you a good indication of why I particularly like this. Next one is Profhilo. This is something I would say is probably the most commonly done skin injectable, skin booster, whatever you want to call it, in the world. Now, I've just mentioned something there, skin booster. I don't think there's a definition of skin booster. Some people say skin boosters versus Profhilo, skin boosters versus Sunekos, skin boosters versus whatever. I don't even know what you're counting as a skin booster. So forget the labels and just look at the product is my advice. But Profhilo, Profhilo's, I'm going to be honest, it's a good product, right? It's also got a pharmaceutical grade HA, which is very high quality, very high purity. A lot of products are cosmetic grade. They may be sort of 10 to 13 times cheaper, but they're not as pure, and so they're much lower quality, I would say. Profhilo is pharmaceutical grade. It's very good in that respect. And do you know what? It also does multiple types of collagens. It does 1, 3, 4, and 7, if I'm not mistaken, and it does elastin. The reason I prefer Sunekos is because Sunekos can say, hand on heart, with proof, that it makes the highest amount of type 4, type 7, and elastin in a physiological way of all products in the world. And that makes it be everything, frankly. And it also makes the fibronectin, as an example. And there's even more things which will be published later on this year as well. And so for me, that's why I prefer Sunekos. But Profhilo, it's fine. I don't have anything majorly bad to say about it, but I don't use it anymore. I used to use it. Ever since I switched to Sunekos, I preferred that massively. And I'm going to show you some pictures as well of Profhilo. There's 3 here. It should cycle through on screen. You can pause and have a look at them, but the before and after, where they've got a left and a right, you can see it has improved. That's not a bad result. I'm sure many people would be happy with that, and so it can work. Lots of people are happy with Profhilo, but I also want to show you the negative side and when things go wrong. Now you may think, well, why didn't you do that for Sunekos? Because there have not been any complications. I can't show you that. If someone's injected wrong and they cause a bruise, well, that's not a product problem. That's the injection technique. And same with their swelling, they put it too deep and it all pulls up under skin and you got that swelling. So the product is the injection technique. There's never been a complication for me to show you. With Profhilo, you can see a couple of these sort of patient testimonials that I've seen there. And you'll get, all injectables will have a positive and a negative. And this is some of the stuff that you'll see if you look online of patients talking about what happened when they got Profhilo. Some will say I got a great result, like the before and after. Some will say I got these lumps or whatever. And it happens. Is it the product? Is it the injection technique? Impossible to say. And I'm not going to speak negatively about it at all. I just want to show you both sides. But the key for me is, if you look at it objectively, if you look at it factually, Sunekos still beats it in terms of the multiple collagen types in the highest amount in a physiological way, and elastin and fibronectin. I don't believe any product in the world can match that, which is why, like I said, I use that. Now, in terms of those things along the bottom, so we've got costs all the way through to experience again. Costs, Profhilo, you're looking, again, I'm talking about the UK here, convert the currency to where you are. You're looking at, roughly speaking, ballpark, between, say, £250 and £300 per session. Most people will do a session or a course of 2 treatments, maybe for around the £500 to £600 mark, roughly speaking, and probably give you a discount if you book more than one in one go. Some people are offering 3 sessions now instead of the old 2. I think the protocol may have changed. I'm not up to date because I don't use the product anymore. But that's roughly the cost. So it depends where you go. There is a bit of a range again, and you're obviously going to get a discount if you book multiple sessions in one go. And I believe between sessions, I might be wrong on this, so please do double check, but I think it's 4 weeks in between each session. So you do it, let's say, on the first of one month and then the first of the following month, whichever you go about it. And then in terms of maintenance, I think it's highly variable. You probably do one every 6 months, roughly speaking. Sunekos, again, if you want to do maintenance, you can do one every 6 months or less or more, whatever. It's up to you. There's no risk with that one. In terms of time, Profhilo is relatively quick to do. The entire face, you don't inject the entire area, you inject specific points. Typically, it's about 5 points on one side and 5 points on the other side. That will probably take an experienced injector something in the region of about 5 minutes to do. It's very, very quick. And I think that's one of the reasons it's popular, because as far as the clinic is concerned, you can see more patients in the day if they're all having Profhilo versus if they're all having, I don't know, a laser or something along those lines, which requires much more prep time. And so I think the time, yes, it's quick, and that's possibly why it's become so popular as well. Clinics love to market things which are, gives them good return per amount of time they spend doing those treatments. In terms of invasiveness, yeah, again, it's not that invasive. You really it's just a needle going into the skin, similar to Sunekos, similar to many other things that we'll talk about today. So not that invasive. I think it's injected slightly deeper than Sunekos in terms of the anatomical layers. So you can potentially risk a bruise, you can potentially risk a bit of prolonged swelling, like you saw some of those things there. But again, it's highly dependent on the operator and who's doing it and all these sorts of things as well. So at the end of the day, not that invasive in my view. Risk, yeah, like I said, I've just mentioned those. Ingredients. So it is two types of hyaluronic acid. It is a high weight and a low weight, and they are linked in some way. I'm not an expert in exactly how they're linked because I think that's a bit of a trade secret. I believe there is some, I could be wrong on this. So please, if you know, do type it in the comments below. I do want to know. I think, and again, like I said, I could be wrong. I think it's some kind of thermal process that puts the high weight and the low weight together. I could be massively wrong. Again, I really want to stress that, but I think it's something along those lines. But do double check for yourself. But apart from that, I don't believe there's much else in it. It's relatively simple. So, those weights are also used in Sunekos, but Sunekos obviously has the amino acids as well. And the high and the low weight in Sunekos are not linked in some way. They're actually separated into separate products. So the way it's applied is quite different. And you get, as a result, difference in protein output. In terms of experience, yeah, I used Profhilo for many years before I discovered Sunekos, and then I stopped using it. I did have patients that liked Profhilo, who just came back and they loved it. And they always talked about this glow and everything. I wasn't convinced personally because a glow doesn't happen. We're human beings, not glowworms. Surprise, surprise. And if someone has a glow, my first question is, what's causing that inflammation? Because that's the only time we do glow, right? Human beings can glow in the same way that Muhammad Ali probably glowed in the ring when he got smacked in the face. Doesn't mean his skin's healthy. It means he's inflamed. And so, in my experience, yes, there are patients that liked it and they kept coming back for it. But I just prefer Sunekos. I don't feel anything matches that protein output. But again, look past my bias. Try and find something that proves me wrong and that does at least all that and more if you can. Next one is polynucleotides. These are up and coming. They've actually been used for a very, very long time, multiple decades. But in the aesthetic industry, in the cosmetic industry, these are now getting much, much more popular and very well marketed. But again, I think they're just total garbage, frankly. And that is an opinion, not a fact. But in my opinion, they are total garbage. At the time of recording, just a few days ago, I was speaking at a conference here in London about how to find a good injectable. And one of the people before me is someone who really champions polynucleotides. And he was speaking for one particular polynucleotide brand. And as soon as I came on, before they even loaded my presentation, I just went, look, polynucleotides are a loaded garbage. And that was the exact word that I used. And I could see the guy sat at the back, George, if you're watching, hi. And I think he had his head in his hands. And all the stuff I said about it, when he was questioned on it, he couldn't disagree. I said it's very limited in the collagen types that it makes. It really only makes type 1 and type 3. Some may have a claim to make a small amount of something else and something else, but really it's just type 1 and type 3. And I said to the audience, that's because it's not that powerful. If it was, it would make many, many different types. And at the Q&A at the end, someone actually asked George, which collagen types does it make? And he had to say exactly what I said. He said type 1 and type 3. And then he said, well, that's all they look for in the studies. And I thought, well, that means you've consciously decided to only look for those. Why is that, I wonder? Is it because if you looked for the other types, you would come up with nothing and it will make you look bad? So you've got to read between the lines in these things. So that gives you an idea of why I'm not a fan of polynucleotides. Really only make type 1 and type 3 collagen. Even the wound healing, there's far better things out there to heal wounds. And they don't produce any elastin as far as I'm aware. And if you think I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments below. Email any manufacturer you like. Say, do you make elastin? Do you make fibronectin? Do you make large amounts of type 4 and type 7 collagen, etc., etc.? And you'll see for yourself, ignore my opinion. You'll see for yourself from the manufacturer that they are limited in what they produce. And so for me, it's really not worth it. I'm going to show you some pictures of them. And you can see there, I'm sure that patient is probably happy. Slight improvement in the skin quality. I think the color, the tone is a little bit better. Although maybe she went on holiday in the before picture, I don't know. But there is some improvement there. And I believe that's from Fill Art on the right, which is probably one of the most commonly sold polynucleotide brands out there. There's lots of other ones. I'm not going to say one is better or worse than another. I don't like polynucleotides in general, to be honest. But I think if you look at the neck, some improvement in that neckline going all the way across, a little bit of improvement in the lines around the mouth as well. That doesn't make me want to buy it, frankly, because any product is going to have a nice before and after. And this is what you've got to realize. Anyone can produce a nice before and after. But if you ask an objective question, like I've said already, which collagen types do you produce? Do you produce this? Do you make this? Do you make that? Whatever. It doesn't matter what the before and after is, because you're producing things no one else can now with that product. So you're going to get better results anyway. So yeah, there's before and after. But there's things you need to know about polynucleotides, which will surprise you if you don't know them already. So going through those things at the bottom again. So costs, you're looking at probably ballpark figure, a few £100, maybe something like 250 to 350 pounds per session, depending on who you see. And in terms of the time, each session is going to be, again, not that long. I would suspect, depending on the experience of the injector, you're probably looking at something like 15 to 30 minutes for an appointment, roughly speaking. And they're done sort of 2 weeks apart. You might have 3, you might have 4, you might have 5 sessions, depending on what you're treating, how bad the skin is when you start the treatment plan, etc., etc. Rough guide. In terms of invasiveness, again, not that invasive, to be honest. It's relatively safe because it's just a needle going into the skin. And the only issues you have is to do with the needle going in as opposed to the product itself. So the risk, I would say, is relatively low with polynucleotides. They are perfectly fine to use. I've not heard of any major issues with them. Ingredients, this is what you need to know. So if I was to say to you, forget that for a second, but pay attention. If I was to say to you, our bodies are perfect in terms of the way they run, because we've evolved over 4 to 6 million years, depending on which paper you'd like to reference. And so everything we require in our diet, in our life, in our day-to-day life is for a reason, because that is what it has allowed us to become apex predators of this planet, and for everything to work functionally, optimally. So you then have to ask any of these products, well, if they're made of something really strange, how can that be maximizing the output of the cell when a cell has evolved to use this and not your strange thing over millions of years? And it's a very valid question, because this is made by taking fish sperm and getting some derivative out of it and then extracting that. So you tell me, where in the last 4 to 6 million years our cells have maximized their protein output by responding best to the derivative of a foreign species of sperm? You won't be able to. And when I said that on stage, that KOL, George, I won't say his surname, I don't want to embarrass him, but he had to sit there in silence. He couldn't say anything because I was completely factually correct. And when you look at the result of that, I'm completely factually correct. They have very limited protein output. They're type 1, type 3 collagen mainly, maybe a little bit of something else. They got nothing on Sunekos. And again, I'll say again, I'm biased, so fact check me on that if you wish. So for that, it's a big cross for me, not a big tick, because it makes no sense to maximize protein output by using something that's from a foreign species of sperm, which played no role in our evolution. Experience, I've tried them. I've had patients that have come to me and said, look, I really want this. And so I thought, fine, because you've asked for it, I'm happy to use it. And sometimes you do get decent results. So you're going to get a before and after, like the one I showed you, where there's some improvement. But let's be honest, like so many things will give you an improvement. Just taking a Dermaroller for £7 and doing that at home is going to give you an improvement. Doesn't mean the product is the best. If you spend X amount of pounds or dollars on this and you get this much improvement, doesn't mean it's good, because it could be that you could have had that much improvement, but because you chose this, you didn't get it and you got less. You're only comparing it to before. Yes, you can get an improvement and be happy, but wouldn't you have the most improvement possible? How do you know which is going to give you the most improvement possible? By asking the objective questions I've given you already, such as how many types of collagens do you make? Which collagen do you make? And that's how you compare things, like you compare credit cards with the percentages. Okay, so polynucleotides, not a fan whatsoever. Email the manufacturers. In fact, I'll link in the video below to a proper comparison video I did between polynucleotides and Sunekos. And I give you objective viewpoints and questions that you can fact check me on, and speak to the manufacturers not even a clinician who may be paid by the manufacturer, but the manufacturers themselves, they can't lie to you on, and you'd find out for yourself the differences. So next one is Sculptra. This is, again, it's quite popular. In different countries, it's more popular than others. It's been around for a long time, okay? And Sculptra, one of the reasons it's quite well known is because it's big in the US. Now, that doesn't mean it's great as a product. The reason things get big in the US because the FDA in the US makes things very, very difficult to get new products in there. As an example, in the US, you've got about 6 or 7 dermal fillers, or maybe 8, I might be slightly wrong, but not many. And in countries, even a small country like Jordan, I believe there's between 70 and 80. So 10 times the amount of dermal fillers. Even in the UK, where I am, we've got hundreds, possibly more than 1,000 dermal fillers out there that we can go for. And that gives you a great variety. And so you get the free market working in a much better way because so many people have tried so many and the winners rise to the top, hopefully at least. Whereas in the US, because you've got a very limited pool, just registering can sometimes make your product quite big because they've not really got much choice other than to use a small pool that then is available in that country. So Sculptra, in my view, I think became one of the reasons it became popular is because it was in the US, one of the few that's approved in the US. I'm not a fan, and part of that is because you go through the same bias eradicating, objectivizing set of questions. Which collagen types do you produce? And do you produce anything else like elastin, fibronectin, things I've mentioned? Sculptra, if I'm not mistaken, produces type 1 and type 3. Now, many people will talk about, this type 3, it converts into type 1 much earlier when you use Sculptra than other things. Great, but it's still only type 1 and type 3. I really couldn't care less. If you look at that diagram of the dermal-epidermal junction, if you scroll back, type 1 and type 3 aren't involved in tightening the skin. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. They go that way in the dermis. The other types go vertically to stitch the 2 layers together. That's not an opinion. That's a fact of anatomy. That's literally just the way we are as human beings. So with Sculptra making, as far as I'm aware, type 1 and type 3, I would prefer to use other things because I don't think type 1 and type 3 collagen on their own are as good as products which can make multiple types, as well as things like elastin, as an example. We all want elastic skin that with good recoil. Once you understand that that doesn't come from collagen, that comes from elastin, just ask a simple question. Does your product make elastin? You're not asking for a lot. It's a simple yes or no. And they can't say yes, want it to no. They have to be honest because they have to show proof that it makes it. And I don't believe, the products I've mentioned there and most products in the world can say yes if you ask, do you make elastin? But again, fact check me, speak to the manufacturers yourself and you can find out. And so for me, I'm not a fan. Here are some pictures. You can see the before and after. It looks nice. I'm sure that patient is really happy. It works. Okay. If it didn't work, it wouldn't be used anywhere. But it does work and you can see a nice result there. But then to balance it, I've shown what was a public post that someone made on Instagram to show the downsides of having it as well. Someone there, I believe, is in the emergency room. Now, doesn't mean you're all going to get that. Sculptra works. It's fine. I think it's partly that person in the emergency room. Was it the product or was it the way it was injected? I've no idea. Potentially just the way it was injected. I think if you use it safely and appropriately, you'll be fine. And as long as the person you're doing it with has experience. But regardless, even if it is safe, even if it's fine, even if you can get good results like that, imagine how much better the results would be if it could make more than just the things it makes. Okay, so if you're this satisfied from something that's limited, imagine how much more satisfied it'd be with something that was much less limited or not limited at all. There's a big, big difference there. So for me, not a fan whatsoever. I have used it in the past, wasn't impressed. So costs. Again, it depends on where you go, who you see. I suspect it's probably going to be much more expensive in the US than the UK. In the UK, you're probably looking at, again, a few £100s, maybe something like £250 to £400 per session, depending on how much of the face you want to try and treat. If I'm not mistaken, it's not for use everywhere in the face. I could be wrong on that. It's been a number of years since I've used it. So speak to the practitioner that you're having it with if you're going to have it. In terms of time, again, it's not that much time required to actually do it. Again, a typical appointment might be something like 15 to 30 minutes, where you could, depending on where you go. If someone books you in for a 15-minute session in these injectables, it's not that they're trying to rush you. It's because you just don't need that much time. Like even when I was doing things, I still inject now, I don't know what I'm talking about. But if I book someone in for 15 minutes, there's enough time there to have a conversation about their day, what they're going to do afterwards, chat about their recent holiday, their kids, and do the treatment. If I put them in for 30 minutes for no reason, I'm just going to be sat there doing nothing. So I'm wasting my day. So most of these are pretty quick in terms of each session. Sculptra, I believe, again, is a multi-session treatment. Depending on who you see, you may need more than one session over a period of time. That's individual, so have a think about that and factor that in. In terms of invasiveness, again, it's pretty much either a needle or a cannula that's going into the skin. It's not really going to any great depth in the body. It's actually relatively safe, depending on the experience of the injector, then using it safely and appropriately. You may use a cannula, I believe, as well, to spread it out over certain areas. Some people may dilute it if they wish. So not that invasive. I think it's pretty fine to use. In terms of risk, I mean, you've seen the picture that was brought up on screen. Maybe it will come up again, of the person in the emergency room. Please understand that's not everyone, right? That's not going to happen to every single person that goes. That's a minority. But I want to be balanced and show both good and bad if it's available for that product. So there are risks involved. But when you think about a product and you think about how is it working, one of the ways you've got to answer that question is it working by inflammation or is it working by physiology? If you work by inflammation, what you're doing is basically irritating the body and it has to defend and react by defending itself. And that's how collagen is laid down in the vast majority of products in the world. And when you defend yourself in that kind of scar type environment, what happens is you're going to defend yourself using type 1 and type 3 collagen. And that's why you find those types in scars as well. So if you find a product that is really only working with type 1 and type 3, typically it's because it's working by fibrosis or some kind of irritation or inflammation. So when you see any product, such as any of the ones I've mentioned, my advice to you is ask the manufacturer, is it working by physiological growth? In which case it would have physiological results, which is multiple collagen types and protein types. Or is it working by irritation, inflammation, whatever the word may be? In which case you can probably work it out by seeing that they just make type 1 and type 3. So that's another thing to bear in mind. Another way you can get rid of people's bias if they represent a company or speaking for a company or whatever, and just look at things as objectively as possible. So Sculptra, again, email the manufacturer, ask them which collagen types they make. If I'm not mistaken, it's type 1 and type 3 only. But if I'm incorrect, I will edit this video, put it in the description. And, please do let me know if I am incorrect by typing in the comments below. So for me, the risk is relative to the injector. As long as it's done safely, it's actually fine. Ingredients, it's polylactic acid, PLLA. Now, this essentially, if I'm not mistaken, works by creating a sort of fibrosis type reaction. But again, please correct me if I'm wrong. Email the manufacturer and double check for yourselves. So for me, it's not something that interests me at all. I prefer something that makes many types of collagens and other protein types and not a limited range. Experience, I have used it in the past. Lots of people still use it, typically in the US, again, because they've got far less number of products to choose from. I'm just not impressed. I'm not willing to use something that only makes type 1 and type 3 collagen as far as I'm aware. Next one is PRP, platelet-rich plasma. There's variations of this like PRF, platelet-rich fibrin, or all these other things as well. I'm not a fan, personally. You will find, again, pictures of people that have had it and it shows a nice result, but frankly, for me, it's not that impressive again. What is PRP? PRP is basically where you take the patient's blood, they'll draw it out into a test tube. You might get, say, 3 test tubes. You put those into a centrifuge, which is a machine that spins round and round, and these centrifuges spin the blood round and round and round. All the different components of the blood separate out into layers. So the centrifuge stops, you pick the test tube up, and you've got different layers of stuff that's in there. And what you do is you pick the golden looking layer, the yellow looking layer, and that's the stuff that has a lot of parts of the blood that we want to put into particular places. And what we're basically doing is taking alpha granules out of the blood, which contain lots of different molecules inside. And they, when we inject them in particular places, can ignite this sort of fire. But the problem with alpha granules for me is, the body has ways to, let's say, build collagen through neocollagenesis, but it also has ways to break collagen down through things like collagenase enzymes. And if you're injecting both into one particular place, well, what the hell is the result going to be? I don't think it's worth it whatsoever. When it comes to hair, I believe there may be some benefit, and I've seen decent results. But for the face, I'm really not a fan. And at the end of the day, if you're not doing too well cosmetically, and that's basically your whole body, how good quality is all the components within your blood in the first place? So if the patient is aging pretty dramatically, enough to come into a clinic and ask for treatment like this, and you then take a part of their body, which is aging, and extract it and put it into a place which is they're complaining of aging, how great is it going to be? In my experience, and I'll talk about my experience with it now, in my experience, you get a temporary improvement, but what I saw clinically was many patients, they just go back to looking the way they were ultimately. It's not actually changing anything in terms of the way the patient is aging. It's just starting a fire in a particular place, but then the fire goes out. And so for me, not a fan, frankly. And I'm going to show you some scientific papers now which really explain why as well. And this is a little bit of evidence, to whatever quality that is, you be the judge, to back up what I've just said. So you should be able to see one particular paper on screen now. And if you're listening but not watching, I'll read the titles of skin microneedling plus PRP versus skin microneedling alone in the treatment of atrophic post-acne scars, a split-phase comparative study. So essentially, this paper referenced Ibrahim 2014. They took some patients where half the phase had microneedling and PRP, the other half had microneedling on its own. And so what did they find? They found that in the end, there was no difference, which means adding the PRP did nothing. So if you did microneedling on its own, you got the same result as doing microneedling plus PRP. It added no benefit. They both looked the same afterwards. And this is why, I believe I saw the things that I saw clinically and why I stopped using it for the skin. I don't think it's worth it at all. It's just garbage again. And you should see another scientific paper on screen now. And again, if you're listening, not watching, the title is Autologous Platelet-Rich Plasma for Treating Chronic Wounds. Now, this is a really important study. Okay, so this is what's called a Cochrane review. A Cochrane review is a very, very high quality level of evidence where it's like a study of studies, if you like. They look at all the data, not one paper, all data ever published in a particular field. And they analyze the entire thing with fresh eyes. And Martinez Zapata 2016, this is the reference for that particular paper. They looked and they realized practically all the data on PRP is subjective. It's assessor opinion, patient opinion, or patient satisfaction, or GAIS, Global Aesthetic Improvement Score. They're all opinions. The studies where they provided some kind of quantitative, objective measurement, there's basically no change. Whereas when you go subjective, people somehow miraculously see things. And they found there was zero dermatological indication for using PRP. And again, I think that's one of the reasons why I saw what I saw clinically. It's just doing nothing. Again, some people will get good results and they swear by it. That's fine. I'm not, going to say they're wrong. They see what they see. I see what I see. But this is the evidence for the reasons I saw what I saw in clinic, and that's really important. And the fact that there was a Cochrane review, I can't stress how great that is. A Cochrane review is very high quality, most of the time at least. And they looked at all the studies and found really, really shocking quality of evidence in all the papers, or the vast majority of papers that say PRP is good. And so have a look at those two papers if you wish, and you can see why I feel the way I feel about PRP. So let's go through that list again, from costs through to experience. So in terms of cost, PRP, again, varies from country to country. In the UK, you're probably looking at a course of 3 sessions, probably around about £1,000 to £1,200, roughly speaking, depending on where you go. In terms of time, you're probably looking at about 1 hour per appointment, roughly speaking, because it takes time to draw the blood, to centrifuge it, do the treatment, clean you up, blah, blah, blah. And then you're probably looking at around 3 sessions for a course. Each one is about a month apart. So if you book together, I'm sure you'll get a discount somewhere if you are going to do it. If you've got some kind of medical problem, I think potentially it's not right for you. So do have a chat with your clinician if that's the case. Invasiveness, it's a little bit more invasive than standard injectable because you've got to put something in your arm to actually draw the blood out and then stop the bleed afterwards. And then you're injecting it into particular places. So it's not the most invasive because people have had blood taken for many things, I'm sure, and it's been fine. People have had injectables and it's been fine. So it's not that invasive, but because of the extra step of drawing blood, it's a little bit more invasive than the previous injectables that I've spoken about. But at the end of the day, still not that invasive in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scale of all that's available. In terms of risk, I think it's pretty low risk. If you, for example, get it into a blood vessel, if it's filler, you've got a big problem on your hands. But this stuff came from the blood, so if you put it back in, nothing's going to happen. So I think that the risk is actually really quite low, and usually the risk is actually due to the needle going into the skin rather than the product that you're injecting. So it may be things like bruising, it may be things like swelling, whatever, etc., etc., rather than the actual PRP itself. Ingredients, it's taken from you. It's what we call autologous. It's coming from you. It's not manufactured in a lab somewhere. You are the lab. You are the manufacturer. So the ingredients, I think, are very, very safe. There's really not a lot going on there at all. Experience, yes, I've used PRP many times. When that study came out, I didn't see it straight away, unfortunately. I saw it many years afterwards when I was trying to research why I wasn't happy with PRP. And then when I read it, I thought, yeah, well, that explains it. And I stopped using it thereafter. Occasionally, I have done it in the past for hair in the scalp. I find, yeah, you can get some decent results with the scalp. But typically nowadays, I'll just refer for other treatments in that region anyway. So I find myself just not using PRP anymore at all, especially since I read that paper for the first time, the Cochrane Review, Martinez Zapata 2016. Do have a read if you have the willpower to get through it. So next one, Botox. Now, I just want to say as a sort of educational point here, the word Botox is a brand name. It's not the actual ingredient. The ingredient is botulinum toxin, hence why on the screen you'll see it says BOT.TOX. The real ingredient is botulinum toxin, and Botox is a brand of botulinum toxin, just like lots of other brands are available, Nuceiva, Dysport, Xeomin, Bocouture, all these other brands. I'm just going to refer to it as toxin for the purposes of this video, but you typically, as a member of the public, will just know the word Botox. I believe if you're going to do it, the best toxin brand out there at the time of recording, at least, is Nuceiva, Nuceiva. And in the US, I believe it's called Jeuveau. In other parts of the world, I believe it's called Nabota, Nabota. So there are the same toxin will have different brand names in different places, like Axe body spray in the US is Lynx in the UK, and that's another example. So I think Nuceiva, Jeuveau, Nabota, personally, I feel that that's the best toxin. This isn't a video as to why, but maybe that will be a video in the future. So if you're going to have it, that's the one to have, in my view. But the thing is, it's not a tightening thing. You know, most people only know Botox and filler because they've been around the longest. So they jump to one or the other. And Botox is not a tightener, okay? It's a switch. It switches things off. And if you look at what it does, let's say you've got forehead lines, it may improve the appearance of the lines, but it's working by turning that communication between the nerve and the muscle off, the neuromuscular junction. And if you want to tighten your face, let's say, for example, you've got teeth grinding issues and your dentist injects here to relax that muscle, and it's really quite overgrown. If it's relaxed and the skin comes down, it might create sagginess, it might create looseness, not tightness. And if, for example, you keep Botoxing the forehead, what happens is as you switch a muscle off in the long term, it's like not using a muscle in the long term by not going to the gym anymore. And so that muscle undergoes what we call atrophy. And that's where the muscle kind of shrinks and gets smaller. So if you keep doing that to your forehead, that's why you get things like brow drops in the future, where there's not enough tension in the muscle here. So everything just hangs down and there's nothing you can do to reverse it apart from surgically pull everything back up. I may be wrong on this, but I think Simon Cowell had an issue. I take it back if I'm completely wrong, but I think maybe he had an issue with that, as far as I'm aware, where there's a lot of Botox here and things just ended up looking really saggy. But you know, even forgetting Simon Cowell, that is a risk in the longer term. Too much here, and there's no muscle holding things up, so it just drops, and then you end up looking saggy. So, and that's just one example in one part of the face, but that's why I don't think Botox is a tool for tightening, essentially. There is a particular way of doing what's called a Botox lift or a Botox facelift. So an actual facelift, obviously, it's just a marketing term. Well, basically, muscles work in pairs. They pull up and they pull down on certain things. So, for example, we have muscles which elevate the mouth and we have muscles which depress the mouth, bring them up and bring them down. And the Botox lift essentially works by injecting some of the depressors in the face, the muscle groups which pull down, so that the muscle groups which pull up win the war, essentially, and things rise a little bit. And there's evidence behind this as well. And that's, you know, as close as you can get to any kind of lift, if you like, with Botox, but it's not a proper lift. In my view, it's not a tightening tool, but I put it in here because it's so popular. And some people will assume, even if you don't, I'm sure some people will assume it is a tightening tool, because patients have asked me about that in the past. But overall, yeah, don't need to go through those things at the bottom because it's not a tightening thing. Then we've got dermal fillers, which I'm sure you know what dermal fillers are. I've not done before and afters, by the way, for PRP because of the papers that you've seen, and you all know that there's no point once you see those papers. I've not done before and afters for Botox because there's no point. You know what that does. And I've not done before and afters for fillers because, again, you know what fillers are. You don't need to figure anything out there. But some people will ask me about fillers and say, well, is that, can I tighten my face with filler? The truth is, you're not going to tighten anything with filler in the strictest sense. You're going to make something bigger. So if when a fat pad in the face gets smaller, you've got a volume loss. So it's appropriate to use an appropriate amount of a safe filler to revolumize that fat pad to give it back the original volume. There's a big difference between that and just shoving filler in everywhere for no particular reason because you think that's the only option available. And so because you've only got a hammer, you think everything is a nail. But fillers are not a tightening tool, okay? If you've got volume loss, my opinion is you can use fillers appropriately in an appropriate amount and an appropriate brand to replace that lost volume and bring it back to where it was. It's not a do-all. It's not a miracle cure. It's not a silver bullet to treat everything. You can't lift and tighten and smooth, whatever, with filler. And so for me, it's not a part of this conversation, apart from to say that it's not a tightening tool, and I don't think you should pay any attention to filler when it comes to what we're talking about here. Now, if you have a need for filler because there is some volume loss, fine. But that's two separate conversations for the same patient. You've got a patient that has a bit of volume loss, the filler is appropriate, and you've got a patient who wants to tighten their skin, which is obviously what this video is about. Two separate things going on at the same time, simultaneously, just by coincidence, based on that individual patient. But fillers isn't being done because the skin tightening is being done. So hopefully that gives you a rough overview of the most popular injectables that we've got there. Like I said, there are others. I'm not going to go through every single one because this video is quite long already. I know I drone on quite a lot. Apologies. But it'll be even longer if I had every single injectable. But if there's injectables that you do want to know about, like I said, pop them in the comments below and maybe I can make a video about those. But also, these things are the things I teach multiple times a week in my school group. And in fact, this video came from the school group. We had a live call where we went through, in less detail than this, an overview of skin tightening options. And it's blossomed obviously into this full feature length, if you like, video on the YouTube channel as well. So link to the school group is in the description as well. Now we've got RF, okay, so non-surgical options in a clinic. So RF is radiofrequency, as I think I mentioned before, but we've also got there, which you can see, U/S, which is ultrasound. Now, they're both completely different technologies, but in terms of the market they're going for, the type of patient they're going for, it's really the same. They're people that want to tighten their skin or lift their skin. The words almost go hand in hand here, if you like. Now, one example of the radiofrequency is Thermage, which is pretty old now. It's been around for a very, very long time. I believe, I may be wrong, I believe it's very popular in China, at least when it came out, and it might still be very popular in China as well. Ultrasound, again, it's pretty old school now. You don't find many people buying it or let alone making it, but you do have a modern version called Softwave available, which works on ultrasound technology. Now, what is radiofrequency? Radiofrequency is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. If we were to put that into the skin, and I mentioned this briefly in the home devices section, if you put that into the skin, essentially what you're trying to do is cause a little bit of damage in some way in the hope that the body turns up or the cells of the body turn up and they go, what the hell is this? Everything's wrecked. Let's clear it all away and replace it with brand new stuff everywhere. Like when you take a damaged car, you know, with bodywork that's wrecked, the mechanic takes it off and puts a brand new one. You got a brand new car. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. Damage things so the body takes it away and replace it with brand new stuff. Now, my view on radiofrequency is, you know, it works on inflammation essentially, and inflammation is one of the key drivers of aging. So I don't think, at least in the long term, it's a healthy thing to do. But I also think in the short term, it's not that good. Like it's just working on coagulation, on causing damage, and there's a limited amounts that you can achieve in those things. And so even the quality of the results compared to other technologies that we have, you know, compare RF, compare ultrasound to some of the other stuff I'm going to talk about today, I don't think those technologies are up to date with what's available. And in fact, let's have a look at some pictures. This is a picture of Softwave, I believe. Credit to the person who treated that particular patient. This should be up on your screen now. But you know what? I'm not impressed by that result. Yes, the neck is slightly better. The jowl is slightly better, I guess, but I wouldn't be happy if I was that patient, and there are ways to get far better results nowadays. And, that's a decent result. It's not made it worse. It has improved it, but I don't think that's good enough compared to what technology is available on the market nowadays. And again, imagine, you've got, go back to the PRP example. You've got someone who's aged pretty badly, and you take a component of an aged person and inject it into an aged area. Well, how great is that result going to be? You've got a person who's aged, who's got poor quality tissues. You then cause damage to already poor quality tissues to make it even worse. I don't think you're going to get a phenomenal result, and that's why I think that result is not phenomenal. Obviously, there will be some patients where they do get great results with anything, but you can't base what's good and what's bad based on the extreme outliers. You've got to look at not before and afters. Okay, that's key. Don't look at before and afters. Understand the mechanism of action and look at it objectively, because anyone can make a good before and after for anything. Doesn't mean it's good. So going through those in terms of costs, the Thermage nowadays, you're probably looking at a course of somewhere between 5 and 10 sessions. You might be looking at, say, £1,000, depending on where you go. The ultrasound, I believe a course might be, again, depending on where you go, might be 1,000 to 2,000, depending on where you are. The time, each session is probably going to be around 30 minutes, there or thereabouts, maybe 45, depending on who you see. These technologies, I'm not talking about those two particular devices on screen, Thermage software, but the technology in general, it's very operator dependent. And in fact, that's a problem with injectables as well. Even Sunekos, yes, I'm biased and I love it. Prove me wrong in the bias. But it does things no other injectable can do. But the downside is it's so technique sensitive. I've mastered it, which is why I teach it. But even these devices, they're very technique sensitive. If you want to get a good result with RF, you don't just say who's got the best device. You say how experienced is a person using the device, because someone who with a lot of experience using a not great device can probably get you a better result than someone with no experience using the top of the line device. And so I would say the operator is just as important, if not more important, than the device. So look at that when you're deciding to go for these devices, and not just the actual cost. You're paying not just for the device, you're paying for the experience of the person doing it. And I think that's more important than the device itself. In terms of time, like I said, 30 to 45 minutes each time. And you might do them, let's say 1 week apart with something like a traditional RF. And if it's something a bit more invasive, you might go once a month, something like that, a couple months in a row. And you might not see the results straight away. Say in the software, if I'm not mistaken, someone from the company, please correct me in the comments. I believe the peak result actually comes a little while after the treatment. It's not straight away, like, for example, fillers, which is instantaneous. Invasiveness, yeah, they do go under the skin. Okay, so they're definitely more invasive than an injectable treatment in terms of how deep they penetrate. The soft wave, I believe, penetrates, and again, I could be wrong on this, please do double check. I believe it penetrates to a SMAS layer on the skin, SMAS, submuscular aponeurotic system. And this is part of our connective tissue in our face to make sure all the muscles move as one unit, or the face moves as one unit. And that's definitely a lot deeper than an injectable, which only stays within the skin. And Thermage, again, that can go a lot deeper. The depth of penetration in the radiofrequency is dependent upon the actual handpiece that's used, but I won't go into too much detail about that. You can look it up. And so that depth means that it is reaching deeper into the skin than a typical injectable treatment, which stays within the skin. So invasiveness is slightly more, which means the risk, which I'm going to come to now, is slightly more. So the risk potentially, if you get this wrong, if you don't do it right, you could end up with burns, for example, because the operator is too inexperienced to know that the right temperature has been reached in the skin, and they need to move on to the next area. You have to keep the device moving in a typical RF. And in software, you've got to choose the right settings on the device. And so there is a risk, which the devices aren't dangerous. The devices aren't risky. My belief is the operator who is not using it right, that's the risk, not the device, which is the same with practically all devices, to be honest. So there are risks, especially of burns and things like that. So do be careful with your operator choice, not just your device choice. Ingredients, it's not really appropriate for this. The ingredient, if you like, is RF or ultrasound. Experience, I don't do devices. I've referred many patients for them. I've worked in clinics that have them. I've never seen a device, blow people away in these two technologies in the way that some of the stuff I'm going to show you still in this video blows people away. So comparatively, compared to what is on the market nowadays, at least at the time of recording, I don't think these two are very good or worth it when you look at the amount of money you spend and what you get, and then compare that return on investment to other things which are on the market. So for me, not worth it whatsoever. And I would say save your money in this context. So next we have FRFMN. For those that know, this is fractional RF, fractional radiofrequency microneedling. This is a sort of upgrade, if you like, on radiofrequency. This is where basically you have a handpiece and some needles stick out in like a grid formation, and those needles go into the skin, release some RF radiofrequency, and then they come back out again, and you move it into a different place. The needles go in, release the radiofrequency, and then you come out, and you just move around the face. And this is basically where when they release the RF inside the face, it's another way of causing coagulation. So instead of relying on the depth of penetration of the radiofrequency by rubbing a handpiece over the skin and hoping that, that the handpiece gets the right depth down, the needles actually go into that depth physically to be at the depth you've chosen, and then they release the radiofrequency. And this is, as you can probably imagine, in terms of invasiveness, it's definitely more invasive than the previous two we've just talked about. But it gives you a little bit more confidence in that you've reached a particular depth in the skin, assuming the needle is accurate and it's exactly where you want, etc., etc. Now, this sounds, much more invasive, like I said, and it is more invasive, which comes with risk, but it also comes with benefits, because it means that you can cause a little bit more change in a fixed number of sessions than you could with, say, radiofrequency or ultrasound, in my view. And one of the most common devices, which you may or may not have heard of, is called Morpheus 8. Morpheus 8 is not a technology. Morpheus 8 is a particular type of device. The technology itself is fractional RF microneedling, and there are many, many different devices that do this. Just like Botox is not the ingredient, Botox is the brand. Different brands do the botulinum toxin ingredient. Different brands do the fractional RF microneedling technology. Morpheus 8 is one brand that does that technology. So Morpheus 8 is one particular company's iteration of that technology. The company is called InMode, INMODE. I think they're based in the US, if I'm not mistaken. For me personally, there are better brands out there. The one that I personally would choose if I had to buy one is by a company called Lutronic, Lutronic, Genius, Lutronic Genius. Lutronic is a company, Genius is their device. So Morpheus 8 and Genius are competing with each other, as well as all of the devices in that particular region. Now, I've got a video coming talking about fractional RF microneedling, but in more detail, so I won't go into too much detail here. But the thing is, you'll have seen a lot of horror stories about this. And my honest opinion is, Morpheus 8 is not a dangerous device. No fractional RF microneedling device is a dangerous device. It's inappropriate use of it that is the issue. You'll find lots of horror stories, but typically, I think if you look closer, you'll see that it's not the device, because the device is an inanimate object, doesn't do anything. You can use it safely, or you can use it not safely or unsafely. And that's where the problems start, okay? To be brief for a second, because I don't want to go on forever when there's a video coming on it. If you go too deep, you're going to cause proper damage. You're going to destroy things that you don't want to destroy. Some people talk about the fact that if you get it into the fat, you can destroy that fat and it can make you look hollow and gaunt. There are all sorts of issues with it. I have my thoughts on it, and a video will be coming out, but this is what I've just said now is a massive topic, very, very compressed, and there's more to it than that. So if I show you some pictures, you'll see on screen now, before and after. This before and after is quite nice, okay? There is a difference in lighting, so how much of it is the result and how much of it is the lighting change, I don't know. But, it's not a bad result, and credit to whoever did it. I'm sure the patient was happy. Nothing wrong with that at all. But then if you look at this other picture, which will come on screen now, of a person with a black bar over their eyes, this is, clearly someone who's not happy with all the sort of changes that they've seen in their face. And that's when things go wrong. Again, I don't think it's the device's problem. I think it's inappropriate use of the device. And the problem is people aren't trained in device physics. Okay, you go to a plastic surgeon or a dermatologist and you think, oh, they're great, they must know, this is their job, they must be great at these things. No. I've taught plastic surgeons. I've taught dermatology to dermatologists. In fact, some of my dermatology students are probably watching this right now, because I know you tell me you watch my videos all the time. But when you go through university and these medical degrees, you don't get taught how a laser works. You don't get taught how fractional RF microneedling works. If that wasn't even around when I was at university, you don't get taught how polynucleotides work, etc., etc. You get taught how to prescribe drugs. You get taught, what guidelines to follow for treating this disease or that disease. You don't get taught any of this modern technology in the cosmetic industry. It's not anywhere. And so they're just as clueless as you are. What happens is these people will buy a device like whatever, in this case, a Morpheus 8. The company will then spend a day training them in how to use it and pick the right settings. And then that's it. They're off to the races. Because they have no experience and they don't have any understanding of how these things work, what do you expect? Things are going to go wrong. And it's a problem with the industry. It's not a problem with the device. Okay, you can't be angry at the manufacturers. And I'm not one to stand up for manufacturers, as regular viewers of this channel will know. But device manufacturers are never the issue, in my view, even the ones that I don't like. It's the industry. The lack of knowledge is the issue. Because if the knowledge is there, it doesn't matter if someone makes a terrible device, no one's going to buy it because the knowledge is enough to not buy it. And so that's where these problems come from. It's from lack of knowledge of these devices, of how they work, the physics behind them, and how that translates into actual treatment as well. I'll give you an example. I don't have any of these devices, so I don't have any bias here. But last year at a conference in London, I was on stage, and there was a debate about fractional RF microneedling devices. There was someone from InMode, I believe Dr. Sach Mohan of London, who works at Revere Clinics. He used the Morpheus 8. He was representing that device. There was someone else, I've forgotten their name, so sorry. They were representing, I think, the Potenza device. I may be wrong on that. And I was there speaking, even though I didn't even have the device, speaking on behalf of Lutronic to champion the Lutronic genius. And it was moderated by a very eminent plastic surgeon in the UK called Dr. Ali Ghanem, Ghanem. And he organized that debate in front of a live medical audience to say, which was best. And even though I don't have the device, I won that debate because of my knowledge of the physics of how these devices actually work. And when I talked about this physics, the other two, they couldn't even come back to me because I didn't even know anything about what I was talking about to offer anything in return. And so I ended up winning because I proved beyond all reasonable doubt that this is a better device, the Lutronic Genius. And in fact, I believe Dr. Ali Ghanem, who was the moderator there, he ended up buying that device 2 weeks later and he loves it now. But I'm saying that just to show you, there's no education on the physics of these things. So the problem with fractional RF microneedling for me is not the devices, it's the lack of education. That's where the harm from these devices comes from, right? You've seen the risks like this on screen. That's not the device, it's the operator. So pick the right operator. Now, as much as I don't like the Morpheus 8, if you pick the right operator, you'll still get a fantastic result because it's used the right way. So I know someone in Scotland, NY Skin Clinic, Elaine Wood, she uses the Morpheus 8 and she gets great results. I know someone in London, Sach Mohan, who I debated against last year. He's from Revere Clinics on Harley Street, so it's obviously going to be more expensive, but he gets great results. Even though he uses the Morpheus 8, which I think is an inferior device, his experience and knowledge is fantastic on how to use it. So he gets brilliant, brilliant, brilliant results. And so that's how you should choose where to go for fractional RF microneedling. I don't believe Elaine or Sach have had probably any terrible results like the risk picture that you've seen here, a person with the black bar over their eyes, because they know what they're doing, even if they use a device that I'm not a fan of. And so if you're going to have this, at least in the UK, they're the two people in the top of the country or the north of the country that I think are worth visiting, I should say. So let's have a look at these factors. So costs. It depends where you go. For example, if you get it in London on Harley Street, you're probably looking at something along the lines of, say, £1,500 to £2,000 to get that done. And that's with good anesthesia. One thing that you won't find commonly done in fractional RF microneedling when you're treating multiple parts of the face is good anesthesia. Now, as someone who trained in dentistry originally, a lot of people find that strange. Why is a dentist talking about this? It's really very few countries where dentists aren't allowed to do cosmetic stuff. It's actually pretty normal in places like the UK. In fact, many speakers on behalf of companies are actually dentists. If you look at, for example, one of the very first people in the UK, one of the most experienced in the UK ever, in fact, Dr. Bob Kanner with Botox, he was one of the first people to use it. He was a dentist. And the reason is because we're taught to inject the entire head and neck by default. Whereas in other regimes or other courses you don't, and it's an extra thing. So I came out of university able to do nerve blocks all around the face by default. And so I've helped. I remember one time there was a clinic next door. They used to send people around to me for anesthesia and then go back for the Morpheus 8. So what happened was I would do nerve blocks in areas of the face, and then they would go back and then they would have the Morpheus 8 treatment. So it was pain-free. Some people, because they don't know how to do the nerve blocks, maybe they weren't dentally trained or they didn't do extra training to learn nerve blocks, they just give numbing cream. And the problem with numbing cream is really on the surface, whereas the needles are penetrating the surface and the RF is being released within the face, not on top. So there's only a limited amount of painlessness you will have when you just use numbing cream on top. I know, for example, Dr. Sach Mohan in Revere Clinics in Harley Street, he does use the anesthesia in that way. He injects the anesthesia, he provides nerve blocks, and he does it properly because he knows exactly how to do it. So if you want someone that does that, I would recommend either a dentist or a maxillofacial surgeon who has to have done dentistry to be a maxillofacial surgeon. Like I have worked briefly in maxillofacial surgery units. I was only allowed because I've done dentistry. Or plastic surgeons who are obviously working with the anatomy and they know where the nerves are and aren't for their scalpel. By default, those guys are going to know how to do those nerve blocks. Other people, you just want to ask, have you done the extra training to know how to do those nerve blocks? And if you do that, you'll have a much nicer time. In terms of time, sessions, not including anesthesia time, you're probably looking at about 30 minutes for an appointment. And you might want to wait something along the lines of 1 to 2 months, roughly speaking, before going again, depending on how invasive it was. And when it comes to invasiveness, like I said, there's a range. Some people can go too invasive on purpose because that's the effect they want to specifically achieve. I know Satch does that. But also he can go very, very superficial and very non-invasive because they want a very, very light effect as well. So invasiveness, it's a range. But at the same time, I would say the risk, which we're going to come to next, is inherently higher with this than with something like Botox or PRP as an example. Because if you get those needles in the wrong place and you're releasing that RF around a nerve, you could get nerve damage. Now, I'll give you an example. We have a nerve here called the marginal mandibular nerve. It's something that plastic surgeons will be aware of, dentists will be aware of, and maxillofacial surgeons will be aware of off the back of their hand by default, because we're specialists in this area. Now, typically you will get taught in a lot of courses for different cosmetic treatments not to go near here, because what happens is if you damage that nerve, you could cause permanent damage. But I know that, again, I'm going to mention him again, Dr. Sach Mohan in London, he goes over here with the Morpheus 8, but he has no issues. Why? Because he understands how to zero that risk or minimize that risk, because he understands that nerve is a particular depth. So if you avoid that depth, you're fine. And that comes to the invasiveness. He's non-invasive in that area, so he's not going to hit that nerve and the patients are absolutely fine. This again comes back to anatomy. It's more about the operator than the device. So risk, yeah, inherently risky, but with a good operator, you'll be fine. Ingredients, again, it's RF, but it's delivered from within the face rather than through the top of the skin. Experience, I've never personally given the treatment. I don't do devices. In fact, most clinics, the doctor doesn't do devices. They have a therapist to do the device. I have prepared patients for this by optimizing their skin pre-treatment, which is what you should be doing for best results. And I've also done the nerve blocks, the facial nerve blocks, to allow the patient to then go into the treatment room, which happened very coincidentally one day because a clinic owner came over, we had a chat, and then he just kept sending patients to me pre-Morpheus 8. So I used to go yo-yo back and forth between the two rooms. So I've done that and I've seen them immediately afterwards. And there is definitely healing time involved from what I can see. But again, the experience, if you're going to go for something that invasive, you're expecting that healing time. You're expecting the downtime. Otherwise, you won't be doing it. No one thinks that a needle going into the skin and releasing RF is a walk in the park, just like applying a cream. So, my experience is purely observational and not actually physically providing the actual needles through the skin. But I have done the nerve blocks for it. Like I said, those two people in the UK are the ones to go for me, the Elaine Wood NY Skin Clinic in Scotland. I think she's in Aberdeen, or Dr. Sach Mohan Revere Clinics in Harley Street. They don't know I'm mentioning them. I don't get 20 quid in my pocket because I've mentioned them in this video or anything. Sach, I know, doesn't even watch YouTube, so he won't have any clue I've mentioned him here. But big shout out to him and Elaine. Next one, we've got laser. This could be a massive 5-hour video by itself, at least. But I'm going to just touch on this very, very briefly. Lasers are like, vehicles. There's such a big range of vehicles available, from a tricycle all the way through to a jumbo jet or more, space shuttle, depending on what you're trying to do. And lasers, there are ones which are very, very non-invasive to very, very invasive. So on the very, very invasive, you've got lasers which basically just take the entire skin off, and you cannot leave your house for like a month or more because of the amount of healing that you need from that. But then there's lasers where you can have it done and go straight back to work. And people just think you've had a little bit of a sunbathing session on your lunch break and that's it. So whatever invasiveness you want, you pick the laser that matches that. But there's one here which I've labeled UC, which you can see on the screen, my favorite. That for me is one of the most revolutionary updates in the laser industry in many, many years. I don't know how many years, but UC stands for ultra clear, and it's one word: ultra clear, one word. Now, like I said, I don't have devices. I don't provide these things. I have done laser treatments on people, not in my own clinic, just on friends and things in the past. But ultra clear is extraordinary. Okay, what makes this different is it's not just trying to cause some sort of controlled damage like radiofrequency or microneedling. It's very, very specific. And this, I put it in a non-surgical, but in terms of results, it could have gone in the surgical if you do it right. That's how revolutionary it is. And again, in my school group, if you're there in the paid group, if you click on live course archive in the classroom tab, there is an entire webinar we did on this laser with someone who provides the laser treatment, Dr. Pratish, and we've got loads of before and afters in there as well. So have a look if you're in my school group and you want to see that. But the way it works, like I said, it's very unique, and you must understand this if you are considering skin tightening. So someone once said, well, if I take a chunk of skin out that's that big on someone's face or body, then they're going to have a scar that big. But imagine I take it so microscopically small that you can barely see it. Well, you're not going to have a scar because it's too small, right? You get hypodermic needles, for example. So then they thought, well, how big a chunk of skin can I pull out without a scar? And it turns out, roughly speaking, it's about 0.4 mil, 400 microns. So if you take a chunk of skin out, let's say 380 microns, you pull that out like you're pulling a cork out of a wine bottle, but then the skin closes up and there's no scar because it's too small to cause a scar. And so then they thought, well, what if we just do that 380 microns loads and loads of times, even though it's only a small bit of skin? If we do it enough, will it not tighten the entire face? That's where this technology came. This technology is called coring technology, C-O-R-I-N-G. And I think it's amazing. If you watch this channel at all, you know I'm very cynical. I speak very negatively about so many things, but I'm consistent because my reasons are consistent as well. But I very rarely get excited about devices, and this I think is phenomenal. And I think it's that good. That was the first ever cosmetic treatment I've ever had in my life. I was that convinced by it. I've had it now a couple of weeks ago. People that I haven't seen in a while have said to me, what have you done? You definitely look different. Might not come across on camera, but they have noticed for sure. A couple people, in fact. And, the healing was very, very quick. I've got a video about my experience having it done. You can follow my healing, all that stuff. That'll probably come out a while after we do this, because you're going to have to do that multiple times. And I'm going to do that multiple times and film the entire thing and make a long-term video as well, so you can see. So Ultra Clear, I think, is phenomenal. It's revolutionary. And that trumps many, many lasers. When it comes to skin tightening specifically, and nothing tightens it more than taking a chunk of skin out, pulling it up, and then stitching it together in a facelift. This is the closest you can get to that. But in a facelift, you've got the massive scarring risk. You've got the downtime. With Ultra Clear, you don't have that scarring risk. You don't have that downtime. You've got looking awkward socially time during healing, but there's no downtime as such. And you can have it all year round. Many people don't offer lasers in the summer because of the heat and the sun causing issues with the healing. Many people don't offer lasers for very, very dark skin types, Asian skin types like mine. It's absolutely fine all year round and for all skin types, which is revolutionary. And on screen now, you will see some before and after pictures that are being cycled through. The person I went to for my laser, and all the cases that you're seeing on screen with the laser, they were all done by the same person. It's by drpratish.com. And in fact, in the black and white picture that you will have cycled through, that is Pratish. You can see his acne scars in the bottom half if you pause the video there, and you can see them at the top half of that black and white picture. Massive, massive difference. It's just that laser. And you can see a picture of someone's eyes. Again, if you go back and pause, you know, they've almost got two eyelids because of the excess skin. And that's a good candidate for blepharoplasty, which is a surgical removal of that skin. But they don't have the surgery, and yet it looks like they've treated the excess skin just by using the laser. And there's other things there. You know, there's a picture there of someone with forehead lines, and the forehead is smooth. Now, if you did that with Botox in the long term, you'd probably get saggy eyebrows, saggy eyes, and look very, very strange. Whereas with this method, you get rid of those lines, you get the tightness that you want, but you keep all your movement. So no one thinks you've had a load of treatment, you just look better. And that's a massive, massive difference. This for me replaces Botox, frankly. It's that revolutionary. And like I said, it's the only treatment I've ever decided to have in my life because I think it's that fantastic. So yeah, I hope you understand why I get that, why I recommend that. In terms of costs, so typically, depending on how invasive you go, so invasiveness, you can get something quite superficial, which is really just treating the surface, like a rejuvenation thing, or you can get full-on coring, where you take chunks out of the skin. You're looking at ballpark figure, and it depends where you go, who you see, which part of the country, what country, probably something like between £1,000 and £3,000, which is a massive range, but that's because you get very superficial and very deep treatments that require different amounts of effort from the operator. If you are watching this video and you go to the same place that I went, which is Dr. Pratish in London, drpratish.com, drpratish.com. He is happy to offer you guys 15% off if you go to him and say you saw this video, I would like to have the treatment. I don't get that 15%. There is no financial incentive here whatsoever. I'm just very passionate about good quality treatment, and I think this is fantastic. Although, Pratish, if you're watching, if you want to use that 50% to buy some steak for me sometime, I wouldn't say no. So costs can vary depending on where you go, and you got that lovely discount there if you're in the UK and you can travel to London. In terms of time, he does use numbing cream. You're probably going to be sat there with the numbing cream for, I think I was sat there for about an hour roughly, but it's worth it. It makes it much, much more comfortable. And the actual treatment itself for my face was pretty quick. You're probably talking 10, 15 minutes, if that, roughly speaking. And you can do it multiple times. You might do it once and then wait maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks, do it again and keep on going. It's not like fillers where you just got to stop at some point, otherwise you're going to look a fool. With this, you can keep going and you get better and better and better. And it's for tightness, it's for smoothness, it's for pigmentation, it's for vitiligo. If Pratish will show you pictures of his own vitiligo and it disappeared. It's extraordinary. Even acne scars start to disappear, keloid scars even. It's amazing. It's really amazing. I have no bias here. I have no gain because I don't have the device. I don't provide the treatment. I paid to have it myself. I just think it's brilliant, and I'm happy to shout about brilliant quality treatment. In terms of risk, again, standard laser risks that you have, but the scarring possibility is much less because the amount of skin that's taken out is very, very small. Hence why you can treat very dark skin types, even darker than mine, which with normal lasers you can't because of the risk. That shows you how much less risky this is overall compared to typical lasers. And then in terms of ingredients, there's no ingredients, it's a laser. Experience, so I have had the treatment myself. It feels like, for example, you step in the shower, water's a little bit too hot, you come away. That slight stinging sensation, that's about it really. The numbing cream does help massively. Do have that. Leave it on for a good hour if possible. In terms of the healing time, the next day, obviously, people could tell that I had something done. If you're going to have it done, maybe take a face mask on the day because you are going to have a little bit of blood in places. But by sort of day 3, day 4, I just looked like I'd been sunburnt a little bit. By a week, no one could tell I'd had anything done. Like it was completely gone. And in the video where I'm monitoring myself, and I'm going to have it multiple times to show you what it's actually like from first person perspective. I actually videoed myself 1 day, 2 days, 3 days after to show you the level, the speed of recovery. And then after a week, yeah, there's nothing there to see. Brilliant treatment. Definitely have a look. And I personally trusted Dr. Pratish with my own face, and I think you will do a good job to do so too. So after that, we have the surgical option. You know what this is, facelifts, tummy tucks, brow lifts, whatever. You don't need an explanation as to what that is. And there's no photos because I'm sure you know what these things look like. Now, nothing will replace this, okay? You can talk about a facelift in a jar, as some people for some reason do. You've got that ultra clear laser, etc., which is probably the closest you can get to this. Nothing will replace actual surgery though, okay, in terms of lifting techniques. There are multiple lifting techniques depending on which layer you want to go. Very superficial, you can go deep plane right down to the bottom as well. One plastic surgeon who I would recommend personally if you're looking for a facelift, you're able to travel to London, is Dr. Ali Ghanem. Ali, A-L-I, and then Ghanem, G-H-A-N for November, E-M, M for Mike. He's brilliant. A couple of weeks ago, he actually did the world's first endoscopic facelift as well. He was the first professor of facial aesthetics here in the UK. Very, very great guy. Really experienced, so knowledgeable in what he does. Very, very humble, no ego. And he's very, very patient as well. Whatever treatment you're after, he will give you an honest opinion. And if he thinks, you're not right for this technique, he'll just say it. Like, look, I'm not going to do this and take your money because it's not right for you. So I highly recommend him. And what he can do, like I said, cannot be replicated. If you're happy to have something like the Ultra Clear multiple times, go for it. When it gets to many times, you may have been better off with a facelift in the first place, with regards to the financial cost, that is. However, the difference is when you do a facelift, you cause immense changes to everything underneath the face. If you have, let's say, a deep facelift, a deep plane, where you're dragging not just the top, but everything, all the layers up at the same time. And there's only so many times you can do that for obvious reasons, because you're messing with the anatomy there to an extent. Whereas with the Ultra Clear, you're not messing with deep structures within the face, so you can actually keep doing that many times. So if you need deep treatment, my advice would be, if you just want to jump straight into it, do the Ultra Clear as many times as you can, and then go for a facelift. It's actually going to make plastic surgeon's job a little bit easier because there's less they need to take out. The more skin they need to take out, the harder it is to make it look good afterwards. Obviously, if there's not enough to take out, then you're not right. So there's a golden window. However, I'm going to show you now, after 10,000 patients, what do I do now? What is my advice? What would I do? If you do what I suggest here, and then you have a facelift, a surgical option, I believe the plastic surgeon is going to give you a much better result. And indeed, I have seen that clinically as well. So after 10,000 patients, after 10 plus years, after leaving dentistry behind, now being a consultant in biotech research, after becoming a global key opinion leader in the cosmetic medicine industry, having taught over 10,000 doctors around the world. And I'm not saying that to be arrogant. I just want you to know this comes from a place of experience. After all that, what are my thoughts? Well, first of all, my thoughts don't mirror everyone's thoughts. Everyone is going to have their own opinion. It doesn't mean that one is better or worse than another, or right or wrong than another. This is just what I found is cost-effective, consistent, reliable, and systematic, and gets good results for the vast majority of people. Exceptions exist. If you've got particular medical history, medications, treatment history, social history, etc., you might not be right for any of this or part of this. So there is something to be said about not taking this generically as meaning it's definitely right for you. There is an element of individualism, which is dependent upon a consultation you have, where you may or may not be able to employ the principles that I'm going to show you in this slide here. So in terms of the skincare, like I said, I put my money where my mouth is. I only use that testosterone propionate cream. You saw the testimonials on screen of people that use it as well. Doesn't mean it works for everyone. There are people that have not seen results with it, who are disappointed with it. So please be aware, it's not a miracle cream, but I think it's a cream which I'm happy to use myself, and you're very welcome to go and see your local dermatologist to ask about it. Or you can come to me and I can work with you as well. It's either or. A link is in the description. So that's what most of my patients tend to use. And the good thing is they don't need anything else. Okay. In fact, I encourage not to have anything else, because part of the safety of that, making sure it doesn't affect the body, is it doesn't penetrate too well. But that's good, because we only want it to go to the skin and not deeper within the body. And so if you combine that with typical skincare products, whatever they may be, typical skincare products are designed to penetrate. So if you put this with them, then you're pushing this further into the body, which is why I think you should just use this on its own. Don't use it with retinoids ideally, because retinoids can increase the penetration as well. That's why I use just that on its own. Injectables, you want an injectable that does all those things: multiple collagen types, elastin, fibronectin, and other things as well, which is why I personally go for Sunekos, why I've spoken about it on this channel. Again, please understand, I have a bias. I'll admit that I have a bias, because I've used it for years. I love it. And now I speak on behalf of the company when I'm teaching how to use it. So of course I have that bias. But if you want to forget that bias and see how you can look past it and make a proper decision, Find another injectable that does all those things, and then that will be the best one for you. I don't think you can. And then we also look at home devices, so specific LED specification. I didn't put it there, but I should have put Dermaroller as well. So I think using that Dermaroller in an appropriate way, I treatment plan it for my patients. Okay, you do it this many times a week, this many weeks in a row, this many weeks off. Do this before the rolling, do that after rolling. We'll make a custom plan for every single person. And then in terms of LED, specific wavelengths are needed, specific energy levels, etc., etc. But to simplify it, I think the two brands that I mentioned, the Dermalux Flex, if you've got the money for it, about £2,000, or the Style Pro LED mask, which is less than £100. Patient yesterday of mine, was it a patient or a school group member? No, I think it was a member of my school group. They picked it up for £70, massive difference. So either or, but both of those things I think are worth it, the Dermaroller and the LED mask in combination with those other things. And then if you're going to go even further, you then add in the top of the tree, the specific coring technology. And for me, the best way is the ultra clear laser right now, which I said I put money where my mouth is, and I actually had it myself as well. In fact, all those things, I put my money where my mouth is, and I've had it myself. So I use that skincare myself every day. Sunekos, do you know what? I've lied. I haven't had Sunekos. I've never had any injectable because there's no need right now. But when I have an injectable, and I will, that's going to be the one I will go for. Devices at home. Yes, I've used a Dermaroller in the past. I still occasionally use a Dermaroller. I've got those LED devices that I spoke about, as I'm speaking from years of experience on that. In fact, some LED protocols that you see around the world, I invented those. Many people don't know those. I literally wrote them, not to sound arrogant, but just to show you I'm speaking from a place of experience. So you can trust what I'm saying. And then on screen here, we've got the Clincal device. I put money where my mouth is there as well. I had the ultra clear laser. So that's why I talk about those things. That's why I mentioned Sunekos multiple times on this channel. Many people think I'm some sort of paid shill. No, I'm trying to speak objectively. If you can find something better, show me, and I will use that instead. That's why I talk about that cream. You saw the testimonials on screen. I think it's brilliant. LED, like I said, can do things nothing else can. The Dermaroller, very, very good return on investment because it's so cheap and you get so much out of it if you use it appropriately. And then if you really want something massive in terms of a boost of quality in your skin, you can jump to an invasive thing like the ultra clear laser as well. That I think you'll be hard pushed if you can appropriately and safely and medically be okay for those things. I think you will get a phenomenal result. And in fact, quite a few people in my school group are basically following that protocol for all the reasons I've mentioned in this very lengthy video. Sorry for making it so long. And you can see them talking about the quality of results that they have. It speaks for itself. So after all these patients, after all these years, that's what it's led me to. I'm sure with more patients and more years, things will change, and I may make another version of this as time goes on, as new technology comes out, as new science gets published, as new papers get published. So this may change, but at the time of recording, this is the way I feel. These are my reasons for saying I like this, I don't like this, and this is where I am in terms of what I think works consistently for the vast, vast majority of people, with some people being exceptions for whatever reason. So I hope that's made sense to you all, and it's given you a lot of information. But please also understand, each one of those sections that I've spoken about could be an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours by themselves because there's so much to say. So there are things I've missed in specific sections. So it's not a full in-depth video on each part, but we do have that in my school group. Like I said, multiple times a week we talk about these topics in depth. For example, we had a thing on LED specifically, how it works. We had a thing on the coring technology, on the ultra clear laser specifically. We had a thing on specific dermarolling techniques. So if you want to join, if you're interested in this kind of education, public or professional, both are in there. You're very welcome. The link is in the description. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments below if there's anything that you would add to this list that you want me to also make a video on. Thank you very much.